Jen, would you mind reading the mission statement for us, please?
Sure. Ipswich Public Schools aspires to empower all students to be global citizens who are effective communicators, analytical problem solvers, and savvy consumers of information. We propose to do this through an emphasis on communication, critical thinking, creativity, self-management, perseverance, and collaboration. Students will be active partners in authentic learning, offering voice and choice in demonstrating competency.
Thank you. For announcements this evening, the next school committee meeting will be held on Thursday, October 5th at 7 p.m. in the Middle School High School Ensemble Room. A tri-board meeting will be held on Tuesday, September 26th at 7 p.m. in Meeting Room C at Town Hall. And a policy subcommittee meeting will be held on Tuesday, October 3rd at 5:30 in the Middle School High School Guidance Conference Room. Any other announcements? I was just going to announce our high school student representative was chosen, voted in by the high school. It's Jimmy Bornstein, who was our student rep last year. So he will be joining us starting next meeting and for all of our meetings thereafter. So we look forward to hearing biweekly reports from Jimmy. Citizens' comments. Seeing none, we will move on. We might have to shift things around a little bit because the volleyball coach is not here quite yet. So maybe we can do the Shade Tree and Beautification Committee request first.
Okay.
Okay, so in your folders, you should have some information.
We received a letter just yesterday, I think the letter came, but prior to that, I had received an email from the town regarding the placement of a number of shade trees on the high school property. And they were all set to go and just wanted my approval. And I said, that's not my decision to make. That's a school committee decision on school property. So we've gone back and forth. They sent me an original plan that had, I believe, 8 trees on it, and I think, let me get the new one here. 5, 6, 7. So now it's down to 7, and they moved one of them. We said no to because of the placement of it. It was right near some utility and gas lines up near the school. So I said no, so they removed that one. And now what they're planning on doing is they're, given some concerns that I had about placement of the other trees, they're looking now to install 3 here in the fall and then, 4 in the fall and 3 in the spring with different trees that are more salt tolerant, because the areas that they were looking to plant them right next to the road, and the reason there's no trees there now is because they died because of the salt that we use on the driveways. So I think what they're looking to do now is to plant a different, more salt tolerant type tree in those locations. They came by yesterday or today and staked them out and took some pictures that you can see that are in your folder where they want to put them.
So, I mean, I just had a question at the beginning, thinking about safety and sight lines and everything, but it looks like they're far away from the buildings, and that's
they're far
not
away,
a
and there'll be
concern.
a taller shade type tree that won't block any of the sight lines. So the locations in green are the proposed planting for the fall. And they're looking for the initial install to happen the week of October 2nd. And the red locations are proposed planting for the spring, since they can't get the tree variety that they're looking for. The Shade Tree and Beautification Committee did adjust the tree selection for locations 11B, 11A, All right, 11B, 10A, and 10C to be more salt-tolerant trees.
How do they get funding for this? Who
Yeah.
pays for this?
No
Anybody
idea.
know?
They must have a grant, I would imagine, to be able to put them in. That or they're being donated?
Do you know what types of trees they are? You know, it seems,
They're all in they're listed, and there's two documents. One of them that has the individual pictures
Oh.
says what kinds of trees they are.
oh, okay,
So red maple, oak,
okay.
northern oak, sugar maple, sugar maple.
I don't know how you feel about oak, but acorns are tough. I don't know. I've been having issues on my playground at work. There's just so many acorns. I don't know how we feel about that in the parking lot, but I'm all for lots of trees.
So we just have to vote to
Mm-hmm. Vote
or
to
not approve
approve,
this?
approve or not approve, or if you want something different.
Any further discussion?
Is it worth knowing where they get the funding from?
As long as we don't have to
Right,
pay
okay.
for it, I
Yeah.
don't think I was just curious.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great, it's
Yep.
lovely that they want to plant trees on
Yeah.
our property. I just am curious. I was just curious.
Are they gifts to the school? Should we be acknowledging it as a gift from somebody to the school?
I think if we do, it would be after they're
Later,
planted,
yeah.
after the fact. Yeah.
And it is our responsibility to maintain them after they're planted.
Sorry, I can only see one picture.
That's a good question.
Yes.
That's the last part of the letter.
I don't, is the letter in our,
The letter is in there.
oh, sorry.
A number of your students have asked our committee what they can do, and caring for newly planted trees and perhaps documenting their growth would be an excellent project.
I mean, perhaps it's something the green team who maintains the garden
Mm-hmm.
can roll it into their maintenance.
I believe there are, I think, male and female trees. And whichever one has things that fall from it and don't. I'm sure they factored that in because then you can eliminate things that,
I would imagine, I mean, this committee's pretty
yeah. we did all that.
educated on,
It's
it's
really
their,
the location
yeah,
that we're
yeah.
focused on.
Yep.
I love it.
I'd entertain a motion. Anybody wants to make one?
Motion to accept the planting of trees by the Ipswich Town Shade and Tree Beautification Committee.
Second?
Moved by Jen, second by Jeff. Further discussion? All in favor? 6-0. Great, thank you. All right, not seeing,
I'm not sure if she's coming.
the assistant coach is supposed to come. He's
Okay.
down the hall at the
Okay.
volleyball game.
Okay.
So if we get to that point, I'll run and get him. We're not there yet. We have one more agenda item. Okay, so next on our agenda, item C is communications review of social media and newsletter content. So again, this is in your folders. I don't know if you want to go over it, Diana?
Yeah, so hopefully everybody had a chance to review the newsletter that's in there. Unless there's anything anybody wants to tweak, which hopefully we can do tonight. We were hoping that Laura could send it out on Tuesday, the 26th. And then corresponding with that, we took the first two bullets and drafted some social media images that we could put up on our platforms. About our goals and the roof repairs.
So there's just the question of the photograph that we're going to be replacing.
Yeah, I removed that all the replacement next day to put there instead.
Placing it? Okay.
Yeah, just we want to make sure that no chance that, because there are students in it, that if there's somebody in it that hasn't signed or that is opted out of it, that they're not included. So just to be cautious, we've pulled it from now. I can check to see if we're good, otherwise we'll use a different photo.
Okay, you're still going to pixelate?
I had done that already. I think just to be extra cautious, we're
Okay.
going to pull it.
Okay.
Sorry.
But
Um,
just start to be, so I've at least pulled that for now. The intention is still that there will be some kind of, we'll keep going with this theme of the school
Okay.
snapshot each month, yeah.
And it might not be a bad idea going forward, if we do plan on having any photos with students, to come up with some sort of mechanism for doing that.
Yeah, I talked to Laura about how do we
I mean,
make sure that
ideally,
we
it'd
do
be
that. And so,
better to not have pictures of students, but it is nice to have them.
Yes.
But we don't want to be scrambling
Yeah.
every time, so. I guess if ideally, it's only a few students, and then they're just easy to email someone at the high school or be able to figure it out. Especially the beginning of the year. I know I haven't filled out
what I'll do for
my
next
forms
month too
for high
is,
school.
maybe what I'll do for next month is just talk about what are the guidelines that we're going to follow each month. That way everyone's familiar and comfortable
Okay.
with it too.
And I'll just add that we have two pieces for the social media. This meeting, the plan is to have, again, if this content is approved for the newsletter, then we'll have corresponding social media pieces next week at our next meeting to approve, and then we'll push those out pretty much once a week.
Okay. Do people have comments on the newsletter or the social media content? Let's see.
I'll say for the social media content, you guys are getting better at templates and making them look good, so good job.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Are we still doing any sort of active recruitment and trying to get our numbers up? I mean, I was just looking, I think I looked at Ipswich Public Schools account that Laura maintains, and there's like 1,000 followers or something. So I don't know if we're like aiming to get that
Yeah.
high or how we're going to try to get there.
We had talked about that, actually. I think if everybody on our committee could start inviting friends, and then next month, we were going to kind of push out for all of our followers to then invite friends. So we're slow rolling, but
Yeah, no, that's
also
good.
happy for people to start engaging.
Okay.
So,
Would it be included, and maybe it already is, the Facebook site on Wednesday weeklies? Is it already included in that, the Facebook, that they could click on and
talk to any of the
like it?
building admins. I know Dr. Blake put it in his newsletter, so I think what he has to think about that.
Or we could post on the Fry's pages on social media to,
Yeah. Started compiling a list of
yeah.
where we can try to push it out to.
I mean, it's probably, we agreed to start slow, so. All right,
I'm happy about
It
the
looks,
numbers. I think they are coming in.
yeah, good.
it's so helpful to have them pop up, and it looks great.
Done.
Further, sorry, I'm just texting the volleyball coach. Further comments on the newsletter? Or we don't need to vote on it, so we just need to make sure everyone's comfortable with the newsletter as written with the updated photo, which will not have students, and the social media posts
If it does have students, we'll confirm that they
have the,
are okay
Okay.
with,
Yep.
the parents are okay with the children's likeness appearing.
okay, great. All right. I think we seem to be good with that.
Oh, great.
All right, so we do you want to maybe just start
Was there,
presenting the
did we
field trip
do,
request?
yep, hang on a second, though. The social media and newsletter, so did you do the social media content as well while I was
Yeah.
gone? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because it's cut and pasted
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
newsletter, basically,
Yeah.
and formatted.
All right. Okay. So in your packets this evening, you have just the itinerary from proposed overnight field trip for our volleyball team. The front page of the actual request didn't scan very well, so we just put the itinerary for the project itself, or the trip itself. So 2023 Girls Volleyball Classic Tournament Itinerary. They're looking to leave on Sunday, October 8th, come back Monday, October 9th. They're going via parent cars. There'll be chaperones, the parents, obviously, as well as the coaching staff. They will be driving to Holyoke, Mass. For the tournament. And then, they're going to the International Volleyball Hall of Fame, I'm sorry. And then the American International College, then where they'll begin their tournament play. Staying in a Hampton Inn down there. And we'll be back on Monday, October 9th. So it's a Sunday into Monday, so it doesn't impact any school because that's the holiday weekend as well.
And they did do this trip last year, so this
They
is the
did, yep.
second, at least the second
Mhm.
year they have done this trip. And it's just the varsity team.
I remember I asked this question last year. It's completely paid for by either the boosters or the parents. This is not something,
It says cost to students $80 for hotel and food.
But it's not coming out of our,
yeah, they're
No,
not
it's not-
asking
it's not
for
an
any budget
appropriated
money.
budget,
It's
nope.
just
yeah, it just
permission
comes to
for an
us
overnight
because we have to
yep.
approve all overnight field trips.
And Brian, did you say this when you were reading? I'm sorry. How many chaperones and how many players?
Well, there'll be parents, I don't know the number of parents that'll be going, but you'll have at least 3 chaperones. You have the 3 coaches, the head coach and 2 assistants.
Okay,
About 15 kids on the team, max, I think, so.
okay.
Good ratio. And I know parents, I know at least a couple parents personally that are going, so I imagine it's going to be a very good adult to student ratio.
Can we make a motion to approve this without a
Yes.
formal
He's
presentation?
he's not coming.
Okay. So motion to approve the 2023 Girls Volleyball Classic Tournament trip, overnight field trip.
Second.
Moved by Jen, second by Diana. Further discussion? All in favor? Okay, 6-0. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All of our meetings should be this efficient.
I know.
We'll jinx it.
All
Okay.
right, thank you. So we are ahead of schedule.
We are.
We pulled a 3-item meeting off in 20 minutes. So we are now pivoting to a school committee workshop. We had talked about this over the summer, asking someone from Mass Association of School Committees to come in and give us a talk on roles and responsibilities, given our new, high number of new members. So we are happy to welcome
Dorothy Presser.
Dorothy Presser this evening.
Dorothy was actually with us, well, with the school committee 6 years ago. My first year here, Dorothy did a workshop for the then-sitting school committee.
We're all new.
We were actually at the golf course during our retreat for the last one. So Dorothy, welcome. We are being televised this evening, and so I'll ask you to speak from the mic, or if you'd like to sit down and have it in more of a workshop fashion, we can shuffle around a little bit, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, we can shuffle these down so she can.
Yeah, so that you can see the slides as well.
Who's going where?
is right behind you.
It should.
Squeeze over, we could all fit in here.
Needs to be able to present, though. Dorothy, would you sit? We can put you at the end of the table here. Would that be better for you?
Or
No, I think that's okay. If
alternatively,
we can put you
look
there, I
at-
think you can be on the other side. That's fine. We'll make sure we get a mic for you.
Yeah, we can scoot all these down because we have an extra one.
We can follow along.
Even that mic, we can just swing it over.
Anna, Diana, you need mics because it's hard to even hear you.
You can take that one from,
Yeah.
no, just the standing one. We can swing that around.
Yeah.
Just shift each one down.
While we're setting up, I just got a note from Tom Gallagher. That trip that we just approved may end up being a day trip anyway, but we'll leave it alone the way we approved it. If it's not an overnight trip, then it didn't need school committee approval, but just in case. So, okay. Well, welcome, Dorothy.
Well, thank you very much. Could we start out with some introductions? since
Absolutely.
I didn't meet any of you except Dr. Blake 6 years ago.
I'm Diana Freehan, and this is my second year on school committee.
And I'm Jen Donahue, also my second year. Diana and I were elected in the same May.
I am Sasha Sopik. I was just elected this spring.
Jeff Poirier, I'm starting my third year on the school committee.
Kate Elliott, I'm chair, and I started January 2021, so it's been just under 3 years for me. Most experienced one here, actually, which is
Brian Blake, superintendent, and this is my 7th year.
Jenny Connolly, I was just elected in May.
Nice to meet you all. And for those of you who don't know me, which I guess is probably everybody, right? I'm Dorothy Presser. I'm a field director at MASC. I was instrumental in the development of the district governance project, which is a piece of what you'll be getting tonight. Some of it, for those of you who did charting the course, some of this will be review. But hopefully, because it's not a day when you're drinking through the fire hose all day, and we'll get a chance to talk about how things work here as opposed to just, the very generic roles and responsibilities. I've been with MASC for almost 10 years, and I also was on my own school committee in Linfield for 21 years. Things to aspire to, you can all aspire to that, so. Because consistency can be a very good thing, so. So what I have planned tonight is to talk about, whenever I do a workshop, I always want, I do maybe a lot of talking at the beginning, but as we go on, I want to be doing less and less and have you do more and more of the talking. So I'll go through some basic roles and responsibilities and then go into some exercises so you can talk and think about how does it work in Ipswich? How can we implement this here in a way that makes us an effective school committee? So usually I kind of start with the big picture and ask people to think about, if you think about the most important responsibility of any school committee anywhere, what would you say that is?
Making sure the children, the students have the quality education and they have the funds to do everything that's important for them.
Anybody else?
I'll throw out budget.
Yeah. So I think that you nailed it. Budget is a piece of what you said, right? According to the National School Boards Association, the overarching mission or the overarching responsibility of any school committee or school board is continuous improvement in student achievement. So how can you continue to do a better and better job for your students? We don't limit student achievement just to test scores, just to MCAS or SAT results. It's what do you want your students to have learned, achieved competencies and skills that you want them to have gained by the time they cross that stage of graduation. So much more encompassing than just the academic sliver of what they do. There has been a lot of research done, or a body of research done at least, on what makes an effective school committee that has that impact on student achievement. We know that what happens at the board table has an effect down into the classroom. So effective school committees have a vision of high expectations. So when there are challenges, they look at those as obstacles to be overcome rather than excuses for why there isn't progress and why there isn't things happening. They focus on accountability for themselves and for others in the school community in terms of making sure everyone is doing the job that needs to be done on behalf of students. Effective school committees rely on data. I think, you know, even though you might have just joined in May, you know that there's a lot of data that comes across the table, right? Effective school committees will kind of take a step back and think about what is the important data that we should really be monitoring and digging deep into, as opposed to having a lot of data that just kind of comes across the table and you look at it and then move on to the next set. They also focus on relationships among themselves as a committee. We consider the superintendent and the school committee together to be the governance team that needs to be able to work together effectively. So the school committee relationship, that superintendent relationship, as well as relationships with other stakeholders within the school community and within the community as a whole, because you're not going to be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish for your students without the support of the entire community. And they also focus on collaboration, trust, and respect in all the relationships. So that's some of the attributes, some of the practices are that of effective school committees have that student achievement focus. So at your meetings, you're getting presentations, you're learning about what's going on in the schools that helps you keep that focus on student achievement. It's not just, you know, approving the budget and looking at policy kind of in a vacuum away from that student focus. Effective school committees also have goals that, that you understand where the district is headed, and that you have that monitoring function to make sure that those goals are actually being implemented. They also engage in self-governance, so occasionally stepping back and saying, are we doing the best job that we can? Are we doing what we said we would do? Or can we do a better job and be a more effective committee? And then, obviously, nights like tonight, where you're doing some professional development, learning about being a school committee member, learning about what you need to know about education that will help you make good decisions and support your students. Any questions so far? Comments, questions? Okay. So I talked about that relationship of the school committee and the superintendent being the governance team that needs to be able to work together effectively. Both parties in that team have a leadership role. The school committee is leading from a governance viewpoint, and the superintendent from a management viewpoint, managing the day-to-day operations of the district. So the superintendent will come to the school committee with recommendations about budget, about policy, about goals. School committee deliberates over those recommendations, makes a decision, and hands it back to the superintendent to implement. So the school committee is asking sort of those big picture questions of what and why, how much. Superintendent is asking what you might think of as the more tactical questions of how does the work get done, who does it, when does it happen, where does it happen. Particularly at goal setting time, the school committee is the bridge between the community and the superintendent. You're bringing the vision and values of the community to the table. Conversely, the superintendent is bringing the needs of the staff to get the job done. So those two factors kind of come together as you're having your deliberations and making your decisions. And both parties have the responsibility for promoting trust and mutual respect in the relationship. And when it's all falling together well, then you have the trust of the community as well. Questions there? Just to make sure you're awake, here's a pop quiz. How many bosses does the superintendent have? One. It's only the full committee at a properly posted meeting with a quorum present. We always using that, properly posted meeting with a quorum present, that has the authority over the superintendent, not individual members of the committee. How much authority does an individual school committee member have? None. So unless it's delegated to you by the committee, the chair has responsibility and authority by virtue of being the chair, by virtue of the fact that you have elected that person as chair. You may have subcommittee responsibilities, liaison responsibilities, and so forth. But outside of that meeting, you're just another member of the community. You don't have any authority more than any other qualified voter in the community has. You are, however, expected to come to meetings ready to contribute to the discussions, sometimes to ask those hard questions and delve into those issues that need to be delved into. I think we all know that sometimes the best decisions are reached when there are multiple viewpoints and questions that are asked to get to a good decision. So hopefully when you get to a decision, even if you're on the minority side of it, you've had a chance to express your opinion and you support the decision once it's made. Doesn't mean changing your mind, but it does mean letting the decision move forward without getting in the way of it moving forward. The committee is exercising its power through its votes at the meetings, governing through policy. You have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the financial resources are used appropriately. You're engaging the community in the work of the schools, sustaining that relationship, and the committee is also the employer of record on any of the collective bargaining agreements that you have. Questions yet? Okay. So when that team is effective, right, we know that there is that understanding and respect for the different roles. There's an agreement on how to operate and communicate, and that's some of what we'll be talking about tonight to make sure it's very helpful sometimes when those communication pathways and how you operate is clearly articulated so that people aren't making assumptions about how things work, and that can kind of get in the way of things working smoothly. The work of the committee is focused on policy and goals. Of course, everyone needs to be spend the time to be able to do the job and commit to the work. We always want meetings to be efficient and businesslike. Frequent informal conversations, not meaning breaking the open meeting law, but sometimes like a workshop setting like this where you can have some conversation is a good way to get work done. As opposed sometimes to that formal business meeting setting. And then there needs to be that presence of trust and mutual respect. And when it's all in place, it engenders the staff, the confidence of the staff and the community. When I was doing some work a while ago on strategic planning, one of the things that I read was that the members of the community who don't have students in the schools, who don't have that connection to the school, believe the schools are operating the way they see the committee operating. So if the committee is operating well and everything is going smoothly, they'll believe things are working well in the schools as well. If the committee is in an uproar, as I'm sure you've seen in other committees that you're reading about in the newspaper, there are people who will believe, well, the schools must be falling apart too. And then you're not going to get the support that you necessarily want from the community if you're not focused on the work and moving things forward. When there is conflict, that's where people's energy and time is focused rather than on making progress for the district. When the staff knows that things are working well, it also helps them kind of dig into the work, right? They don't feel the sense of maybe a change is coming, or they're not on tenterhooks because there's a lot of conflict going on. So it helps that both the staff and the community, when things are running well, to feel settled and ready to do the work or ready to support the work. So the upshot of that is, don't take relationships for granted when they're going well. You want to continue to nurture those relationships and keep them working well. Make sense? Okay. Now you know it all. You're done, right?
Sounds easy.
So that's kind of the big picture. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to be a school committee in Massachusetts, some of the roles and responsibilities that you have. And I'll go through it quickly so we can get to the exercises. Yeah.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned having workshops versus business meetings. Can you define the difference for us? This evening, we scheduled a school committee business meeting that went from 6 to 6:30, and then we transitioned into this workshop. And other nights, we've done just workshops. What are the differences between?
So a workshop is generally, more often than not, will only have one agenda item, and you're really, and it's generally less formal than a business meeting, so there can be a little bit more give and take and discussion. And oftentimes, committees may use workshops if there's like a big issue on the table, so they can devote a good amount of time to that issue. Sometimes they are not televised. They might be in a less formal setting than your typical meeting would be in. You have what we would probably say is the ideal setup for a meeting because everybody can see each other. Sometimes they're in like the city council room or they're all in a big long row and people can't see each other, and that can make a business meeting not as productive as when you can have that ability to see each other. There are some committees who, if they have 2 meetings a month, will have one that's a business meeting and just kind of chug through the business that needs to happen, and the other meeting is a workshop where they're more devoted to one topic, where they might be talking about their goals, they might be talking about, maybe a budget workshop, things like that. Does that answer the question?
Just some of the nuances, workshops still need to be posted.
Still need to be
Really?
posted. Generally,
Minutes
minutes need to
taken.
be taken. Generally, when you have a workshop, you don't take any votes. That it's really more for discussion and teasing out issues or, yep. Ready to move on? Okay. So as in Massachusetts, the school committee is considered to be the municipal legislature for schools, with certain defined roles. You're establishing educational goals. That doesn't mean the committee is creating the goals, but you're working with the superintendent to make sure that there are goals established. A coach I used to work with used the line, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So you want to have a roadmap. You want to know where the district is headed. The committee enacts policies, approves and monitors the budget, hires and evaluates the superintendent and certain other positions that I'll talk about more in a minute, where you have advice and consent. And then, again, you're the employer of record on the CBAs. So I'll go through all of these quickly. Again, I really want to get to the part where you guys are talking. So just to take a step back and think for a minute about why is goal setting important? Why do you want to make sure you have goals? It's the way you're exercising leadership. If you are not setting goals, there will be special interest groups that will be happy to come in and take that role for you, and then you'll be following rather than leading and reactive rather than proactive. It enables everyone to kind of know where the district is on that path of continuous improvement. And again, it kind of gives you that, the confidence of the community and the staff. The staff may then understand why certain initiatives are in place. Why are we doing this PD? Why are we looking at this curriculum? Because it fits into our district goals. And different members of the staff can also be thinking about, what's my contribution to the goal? How can I help further the work of the committee as they're thinking about their own goals? And then when you get to budget time, if you're tracking your goals, monitoring your goals, and able to talk about progress, it really gives you a good story to tell at budget time, because you can be talking to the community about, we had these goals, we asked for these resources so we could implement these goals. This is how we effectively used the resources that you gave us to further the education of our students. Now, in order for us to accomplish our next set of goals, these are the resources we need to do it. So it can, so tying that goal story and that budget story together can be a helpful way to be talking to the community about the budget that you are asking them to support. So in my organized mind, goals actually put a frame around and give a structure to the work of the school committee. One of the tasks that you have is ensuring that there's alignment of those goals from the very top down, as you're looking at school improvement plans and your own goals and superintendent evaluation goals and so forth. A lot of the responsibility that you have at your meetings then is monitoring the progress towards the goals, making sure that the goals that have been set are actually getting implemented. Again, in some of my reading, one of the things I read in strategic planning is most plans fail because of a fail to monitor the plan. So, sometimes a lot of work will get put into creating, whether you call it here a strategic plan or a district improvement plan or whatever. If you're not monitoring the progress and making sure that the goals that you set out are actually happening, then you might have done a lot of work for nothing. So that's not usually the case, but I think in the past, when people would put together these very detailed strategic plans, sometimes then they just kind of got put on a shelf and people went their own way. Again, budget support, the goals, that tie in between budget, when you're considering your budget decisions, thinking about how are we using the resources to support the goals. And then sometimes school committees have their own goals, sometimes they don't. If you have your own goals, they need to be things within your purview, not a way to sneak more goals onto the superintendent. But thinking about if you have goals, for instance, reviewing certain policies to make sure that they, a lot of committees right now are sort of reviewing some of their policies to make sure they align with equity work. And so different things within your purview that you can help further support the goals of the district. Does that make sense? So I mentioned goal alignment. We always want to make sure that there's good alignment of the goals, starting with the big picture district goals. Most districts have like overarching goals, again, whether you call that your strategic plan or your district improvement plan, those goals that look out 3 to 5 years. And then every year you have an annual plan of what's the work this year to get us closer to those overarching goals. And then when you're looking at the goals for the superintendent or your school improvement plan goals or, goals for yourself, if you have them, how do they support the district goals? Superintendent is working with the administrators to make sure their goals, again, align back to the district goals. Principals are working with teachers to do the same, and that's all in that pursuit of continuous improvement and student achievement. Are you awake?
Can I go back to the pyramid?
You can.
So as a school committee, how much insight or kind of feedback should we be getting for those goals that are higher up on the pyramid? So we currently don't
You do no.
get any kind of feedback of like, these are the goals that the administrators are working on. Should that get funneled to the superintendent?
Yeah, so the only, going back to you only have one employee. So you're working with the superintendent to set the superintendent's goals. The superintendent then is working with the other, working sort of down the chain of communication or chain of command to make sure that those goals align. You'll see it mostly in the school improvement plans. That's where you sort of have the window into, I guess, sort of beyond the superintendent. That that you can see that there's an alignment. Maybe not every single goal in a school improvement plan, because there may be school-specific goals that they need to work on, but in general, that they can tie back to the district plan. Does that make sense? So where can you find policy that's established by the school committee?
Soon to be searchable.
Soon to be searchable on MASC, yes.
It's actually, policy is actually in more places than just your policy manual. If you think about it, I'm not going to read through this whole list, but, you know, things like the collective bargaining agreement has the force of policy. Obviously, your policy manual. Probably the biggest policy document that you deal with in the course of any given year is your budget, because there's actually a lot of policy implications that are embedded in those budget decisions. So just be aware that policy is in more places than your manual. So then moving on to personnel. School committee has personnel responsibility, superintendent has personnel responsibility. School committee hires and contracts with the superintendent, hires and retains legal counsel. Very often, probably pretty regularly, the superintendent needs to have confidential conversations with that legal counsel, particularly when things involve students or staff. But who that counsel is the decision of the school committee. You provide advice and consent on the positions that are listed. That means that the superintendent runs the hiring process. Might look a little bit different in different places, but basically the superintendent runs the hiring process, brings someone to you who, and as long as that person is qualified, brings that person to you to approve the hire or consent to the hire. As long as that person is qualified, you can't unduly withhold your consent. So you can't think, well, I'm pretty sure my cousin applied for that job and I really wanted my cousin to have it, so I'm not going to approve this person. As long as the person is qualified, you give consent. Once the person is hired, then
The question was, do we do that for nurses? Our nurses are actually in
in the
teachers'
CBA,
bargaining unit.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's, you know, the nurses, physicians, and the attendance officers, it's in the law, but it's a little bit murky. I have a lot of, you know, I have heard that council will advise if they're in their CBA, you don't need to approve. I've heard that it's an oversight that was never corrected in ed reform in 1993. You'd think if that was the case that, you know, 30 years, they could have fixed that. And I've also heard that because physicians and nurses have licensure that does not come from DESE, the vote of the school committee gives them some liability coverage that they wouldn't have otherwise. I don't know which is correct. Those are all the stories I've heard. But I clearly, if your council says they're in the CBA and you don't need to approve, follow the advice of your council. What I was going to say was once the people are hired, then they become the employee of the superintendent to evaluate and further contract with and so forth. The school committee establishes compensation for people on individual contracts. Generally, that menu of compensation mirrors what's in the collective bargaining agreement. If there is a particular person where the superintendent may want to go outside of that, maybe there's been a bunch of changes in, I'll just grab a position, middle school principal in surrounding areas. Your middle school principal has, because of those changes and ups in salary there, your middle school principal's salary may not be competitive. You want to keep your middle school principal, you want them to have a competitive salary. So the superintendent may say, I might need to make more of an adjustment here. Or, you know, little things like that happen where the superintendent may come back to the committee and ask for an outside of the usual change. But as long as the superintendent doesn't go outside of that, they can just contract with the individual employees. For the last time, I promise, you're the employer of record on collective bargaining. Never figured out how to say it fewer times.
It's important to say that, though, because this year we're negotiating all of our contracts. So that's going to be an important piece. It's not what I want, but collectively what the school committee
Yep,
negotiates.
right. So the superintendent is hired by and reports to the school committee and is hired as your chief educational administrative officer, managing the day-to-day operations in the district. has authority over personnel, supervises the principals, who then in turn have site-based management over their own buildings, and is implementing the policy that the school committee approves, passes, establishes. And then it initiates the budget proposal that you initially consider, and then manages the budget that's ultimately passed. Questions there? So I will spend very little time on budget. Just to understand that there are budget responsibilities that you have. You should have a basic understanding of school finance. It doesn't mean understanding all the ins and outs of how Chapter 70 works and everything, but you should have at least a good understanding of where the money comes from and where it's going to. Fiscal policy, again, you know, that you have Section D of your policy manual, which is your fiscal policy, so that falls under your purview to establish. The appointment of the superintendent and confirming the appointment of the school business official, that is your fiduciary responsibility. That falls under your fiduciary responsibility. Those are the two people who you are charging with managing the budget. So that appointment is part of your fiduciary responsibility. Linking the budget to goals, you want to make sure you're working on that. And then the final budget proposal that is sent to town meeting is the decision of the school committee. Then once you sort of relax and say, we got a yes vote at town meeting, on we go, you're not done. Right? You also have the monitoring responsibility for the fiscal year to make sure that there's accuracy in the budget, to look at the cost centers and know that if spending needs to transfer from cost center to cost center, you're aware of that, and making and voting the transfers, and then signing the warrants is also the budget responsibility of the school committee. Now you know everything, right? No. Any questions about what I raced through? Okay. So I'm going to do a couple things now. I have a couple scenarios to talk about and discuss, so you can think about everything that we just talked about and how does it work here, right? So the first scenario is, I'll just read it and then we can discuss where you think things are appropriate, inappropriate, questions you have about what may or may not be appropriate. A school committee member comes in to meet with the superintendent, and the member wants the district to change the math curriculum. He has heard about great instructional materials from his brother, who teaches in another district. He has a lot of information, including textbooks, that he wants to share with the committee and the superintendent. So, are you ready to dive in and say something?
I am.
Okay, go ahead.
So I would think that's okay, as long as you're coming from a parent or a non-committee way, because I feel like, you know, we don't lose our responsibilities as parents. So as long as we're not coming into it as a committee member, and we're going to the superintendent as any other parent is allowed to.
Any other thoughts about that?
However, if it's a committee member comes in to meet with the superintendent, you're not coming in as a parent.
So we kind of lose our rights as a parent to go in individually, because we wouldn't be representing the committee, because we're not appointed to represent the committee, as you were saying.
But when you walk into the office with your committee hat on, do you
But if
think
you
the
don't?
superintendent sees you as a parent or as a committee member? And if you read a little bit further, thinking about this person's objective is to change the math curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
So would an individual parent be able to walk into the superintendent's office and say, I want you to change your whole math curriculum?
Well, I had a meeting with the superintendent, not about this.
Yep.
But I had a meeting with the superintendent as a parent.
Before you were
which was great.
elected.
What?
Before you were elected.
Right, that's what I mean. So we lose that right as a parent to not have the committee, like, as a
So,
parent.
well, you have a seat at the table, right? So you never lose your right as a parent to advocate for your own child.
Yeah.
But once you're on the committee, you do have a different role, and you are perceived differently. And I think in talking to staff, in talking to even the superintendent, there's a different relationship there that you have to be aware of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wish that wasn't the case in terms of, not being able to share. I mean, this seems like someone wants to share information with the superintendent. And not saying that this needs to happen, not saying the committee voted on this, but just saying, like, here's some information for the school to consider.
Okay, so that's different than what this says, though.
Oh,
Some information to consider, and if you don't consider it, I'll walk away and be happy, is not what this says.
well, it
So
just
that's-
says wants, but not
Yeah.
demands.
Okay. Okay, any other,
So I'll just add, so the school committee does not, it's not our purview to change curriculum, is my understanding. So in this scenario, I don't know what the ask is with this scenario, but it is not in our purview to affect curriculum. And if you go back to, I think, the pyramid, so we established district goals with the superintendent who manages, administrates the education of the schools. So in this scenario, this is not appropriate, or I don't know if that's the word to use. And then just to give a different scenario, so one thing about checking your parent hat at the door is it is not a prerequisite to be a school committee member to also be a parent, because in my
Oh,
time
right,
as,
right.
right? So we've
Whoever's
had
the-
parents, we've had members of this committee that are not parents of children in the schools at all. Like, so never had students in the schools. They're just citizens who ran and were on the committee. So, but I think in this scenario, this is not the appropriate avenue to affect curriculum.
anybody else want to opine? So I think another thing that as a committee member, you need to be aware of the goals of the district and think about that there's a time and a place to be discussing. You know, you may want the math curriculum to change. You may feel like the data shows that we need to make a change, right?
For the record, that was just the example given.
Yep, no, I'm just
Sure.
saying
No,
you
no, right.
because you jumped.
Right.
So this member may feel like the math curriculum needs to change. But at this point in this scenario, the member seems to be acting unilaterally to go into the superintendent. If the committee member feels that there are issues with math, there's a place at the table, right? There's a place here when you're talking about goals, when you're looking at data, to say the math curriculum needs to change. You also probably have, I'm just guessing, a policy that talks about if there's going to be a change in curriculum or if there's going to be if you're looking at a curriculum and you're looking at more, looking at different instructional or curriculum material, that there's a policy that says, here are the things that need to be considered in terms of picking what might get piloted, right? So I think in this instance, if you want to say that the start of it is, and sort of divide it up into pieces, and say a committee member has some desire to change the curriculum, there's nothing wrong with that. But the place where you bring your desire is probably not directly to the superintendent, it's probably to the committee, right?
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah. And then, you know, the path that would be followed is probably not, you know, here's this, can we change next week, right? It's probably more involved than that. Anything you want to add to that?
So I think a good example is several years ago, we were in a, not this situation, but regarding our math curriculum, we knew that we needed to make changes. We studied it as part of our cascading curriculum review cycle, piloted a new math program at the elementary level in one school, then expanded it, and now it's moved up through both elementaries and the middle school, the illustrative math program that we're utilizing. But that came through an acknowledgement that we needed to do something about our math scores and looking at the data, and then the director of teaching and learning working with we call it compass committees, but curriculum committees decided what we were going to research, what the criteria was for that, and then we ended up settling on illustrative math. We piloted it with some folks and then expanded it. So there is a process in place, to your point, that we follow with that.
But what was school committee's role in that? I mean, was that acknowledgement, did that stem from school committee discussions talking about student achievement, or did it?
From test data. From test data, and then the impact was through the budget process, because we needed to switch and purchase new materials and things over a number of years to expand it.
I think another, in the very big picture, while this is sort of a very narrow scenario, right? In the big picture, the committee and the superintendent working together establish the goals and the direction, and that kind of defines your work. And in thinking about different things that come up, any ideas that you have, you might want to think about, well, how does this fit into our work right now? And not let the committee get really sidetracked with a lot of, I mean, there's really good ideas that come up, right? But you need to sort of think about what's the time and the place to be talking about new ideas, and not letting yourself, what was that movie where the dog is squirrel, 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 squirrel? To kind of keep on a path that keeps you moving forward. Make sense? Let's see if I can make Andy work here. So this is our friend Andy. Hope there's sound that comes out. We'll see.
Is your sound up on your computer? Then it should work.
This is Diane Walker.
Hey, Diane, it's Andy.
Hope I'm not bothering you.
Oh, no, I'm just here finishing up some loose ends at the office. I have to get ready to go to the high school basketball game tonight.
Ah,
How can I help you, Andy?
I've gotten a number of calls about the high school girls.
Basketball coach.
What about her?
Well, it seems like the best players aren't getting to play.
Well, I sort of leave that thing up to the coach.
It looks to me like we may have a real case of favoritism.
Favoritism?
Yeah, favoritism.
The 5 girls who always start go to the First Community Church.
And that's the same church that the coach attends.
Well, that's a really big church. Don't you think it could be a little bit of coincidence?
I don't know.
I've been trying to reach the principal of the school where she coached last year to see if
She's done this kind of thing before.
But my question for you, Diane,
What are you going to do about this situation?
What did you see?
He's a school committee member?
Yes. Oh, Andy's a school committee member. Yeah, sorry.
Go, Diana.
Don't do that. It is not in our purview or power or job role to directly contact administrators from a school committee standpoint and try to have influence in that way.
Yep. Yep.
Just to play devil's advocate, could you call and say, I am calling you as a parent, and here's my issue, not as a school committee member? I don't know.
So I think of it this way. When you get a call from a parent who has an issue with their kid's third grade homework, what do you say to the parent?
Did you say third grade homework? Contact the teacher,
And then if you're not satisfied,
principal,
and then if you're not satisfied.
superintendent.
So I tend to think of that chain of communication going the other way for school committee members. Right, that you wouldn't contact, so a couple things here. You would not contact the administrator. You hire the superintendent to run the district. And unless the superintendent knows the issues that are out there and the questions that are being asked, he can't effectively run the district. So and he also needs to be able to manage his administrators. And if they're getting input or questions or requests from the committee, then he loses that ability to make sure that they're focused on what he needs them focused on. So that, think of that chain of, that sort of, parents climb the ladder and you kind of start at the top and go down if necessary, or the superintendent would go down, rather than putting the administrator on the spot with a request. There was something else Andy did that he talked about the playing time and the coach belonging to the church, and it was a new coach. What else did he do?
That he was trying to reach out to the former principal, or the principal at the school
Yep.
that the coach had also worked for.
Yep. Appropriate? Not appropriate. Because the other thing that, one of the other issues here is you only evaluate one person, right? That one person is in charge of making sure everyone else gets evaluated. And what Andy's doing here is making evaluations, essentially, of the coach that he has no authority to make.
So if there's an issue, for this example, what he should have done is gone to his superintendent and talked with him and ask him to talk to the administrator? Or say, I'd like to talk to the administrator about that and include him in the dialogue?
I would lay out the issue and then have the superintendent tell you how the superintendent would like it handled.
Okay.
Which may be totally not within your purview.
Right.
And there may be instances where you bring something to the superintendent and he works on it and he cannot tell you anything about the resolution of it, other than it got resolved. Because if it involves students or it involves staff, that very often is confidential, either personnel or confidential to the student. Particularly if parents may be calling you about issues that involve maybe discipline, right? That the superintendent can let you know it was addressed, but you're not going to know what happened.
And that comes into that trust piece.
Yep.
Of the superintendent,
Yep.
which can be hard for us, because
Yep.
sometimes school committee members might want to know more, might not like the way the superintendent handled it, but, I mean,
Yeah, no, that's
that's
spot on.
the
And
way it
I
is.
think too, sometimes school committee members may be involved in the situation in some way, and so that makes it equally difficult.
I think, when we thought back to sort of the beginning of Andy's phone call, and I understand that players aren't getting, certain players aren't getting time. There's also kind of a question, well, how did he know that? I mean, was he going to the games and watching? Or were parents of telling him that, right? So another aspect of that is when a parent calls you with an issue, your job is not to take on the issue and solve it for them, but help them get to the place where the issue can be addressed. Does that make sense?
I think,
Oh, God, I'm sorry.
that's okay. I think school committee members sometimes have a hard time with that because if the school committee member doesn't feel like the superintendent handles it appropriately or the way that the school committee member might want to handle it, the superintendent reports to us, so then there's sometimes that perception that that is in our purview because we're unhappy with his. It gets complicated.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Sometimes it's not, it's to bring the attention of the issue to the superintendent for it to be resolved, not necessarily how to resolve it.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
there are situations where, because of the information that I have as the superintendent working with the personnel, I may come to a different conclusion than the school committee feels that I should be coming to or expects me to come to, and
From my own experience, and I had to learn it more than once, that sometimes when someone comes to you with an issue, you don't have the whole story. There's another piece of it that you don't have, and you may never have, but sort of needing to have that understanding that when a parent comes to you with an issue, it's their kid, right? They're passionate about it. They have a certain viewpoint. They want to be protective of their kid or whatever, but there may be another part of it that you're not, either they don't know or they're not telling you, that the superintendent in investigating puts the pieces together. And then that's the decision to resolve. And then I think, in terms of if issues keep coming up over and over and over and over again, right, then maybe then there's something to look at because it's more systemic than the sort of the parent here, the parent there, the parent there, right? So that's when the school committee may start to think about, is there a goal here or is there a discussion here? But all that makes sense? I can do this without. Getting on to the next slide after this. There we go. Okay. So here's another one. During a committee meeting, there are several committee members who have questions about expenditures that were in the budget they approved, including purchase of new technology for the high school. Committee members are curious about how the money was spent, and they want to make sure that teachers are receiving professional development so they know how to teach with the new technology. What do you think about that one?
Like an appropriate question under the monitoring powers of the approved budget. I think we recommend that, the superintendent, have IT or, teaching and learning come in and explanation of what either was purchased or what the training is and report back to the school.
Yep. I mean, this one I think is a fair question, right? You've made an investment in technology, and you want to make sure that it is being used appropriately. I think sometimes when I put this scenario up there, people say, no, we can't ask questions about that. Professional development isn't our purview. But in this case, it is, I think, that monitoring function that you want to make sure that that the investment was worth it, right? That if the technology was purchased and the teachers don't have the tools to implement the use of it, then it was, good money after bad or whatever you want to say. That then you may need to know that in another budget cycle, there needs to be money put into professional development to support the technology. So yeah, I think that's a real fair question to be asking. I have another exercise for us to do. Need to get my papers over here.
So while you're getting that ready, what if scenario 3 came up because teachers were reaching out to school committee members and saying, we don't know how to work with this new technology, we don't have professional development? I mean, maybe we could then say back to them, we hear your concerns, we're gonna bring it to the,
So that may be one of, you know, I said if you hear things like that over and over again, systemically, there may be questions to ask. So if you're hearing it from maybe one teacher, or maybe you realize that you're hearing it from a building or something, that would be, I think, the time when, yeah, it's legitimate to ask that question,
bring it
even
back
though
here.
it's bubbling up from someplace else, because you're hearing it from a lot of different sources.
I also think we have sort of a standing arrangement that if we get that individual feedback, we're supposed to funnel it to the chair. And so if I, as a school committee, get it, you know, it's to direct it to Kate, and then you may, or the executive committee or somebody may bring it to Brian.
So this is our issues worksheet. It's divided up into before meetings, at meetings, and between meetings. And it's different issues. It's either the reasons we get phone calls in the office, or you know, sometimes when we're out working with different committees and issues tend to come up over and over, then they get added to the list. And a lot of times, sometimes I divide you up into teams to go over it like together, and then we come back together. I think in the interest of time tonight, we'll do it just as one big group, so that we make sure we can also get to the other piece of the workshop that you want to get to. And just, you know, just kind of go through the bullets and think about, is this an issue for us? And if it is, how and why is it an issue, and how might we decide as a group that that's the way we would like to handle it? And also, we might want to know, just, you know, if there are things that you say, no, we've got this nailed, we know how to do this well, or we do it well and we're happy with the way we do it, might want to just make note of that too. Because when we talk about, you know, groups working together effectively, we want you not only to sort of weave through anything that might be misunderstandings or problems, but articulate and sort of make sure you're continuing to do the things that you feel you're doing well. That makes sense? Just to be fun, let's start it between meetings instead of at the top.
can I just say before we start?
Yep.
If any of this has to do with performance of the chair, bring it on. Like, I'm happy to hear, like, let's be open and honest.
All right.
Feedback's good.
So individual members requesting information from the superintendent. How does that work here?
I did that. Works fine. I didn't even think that, you know, that it would be, but you said you were going to share the information with the
With the committee, yeah.
So that's,
So can I gather you asked for some information?
yeah, something that we had, not like a random thing, but something that we had been working on.
It's actually the second part of the workshop, so this is
Yeah,
around,
okay.
Okay.
around
Yep.
superintendent goals
Yeah.
and superintendent evaluation. And so Jen reached out to me to ask if I had models of other superintendent goals, which I will end up sharing with the school committee,
Yep.
just in terms of,
So, and I
Better
think,
right mind.
so, and I think you hit, Jen, you hit the key that you asked for the information, and Brian said it was going to get to everybody.
Yeah.
Because I think, particularly when you're working towards a decision, you want to make sure everybody has the same body of information to be able to make that decision. Sometimes we talk about if an individual member requests information and it's like short and easy, then that's great. But if it's something that's going to take a considerable amount of time, it's probably better that the committee asks for the information so that the superintendent feels like there's one boss instead of 6, right?
So I should have
Yeah.
included everybody.
Well,
Or you could ask me.
yeah, yeah,
I would have asked him, and he would have
Okay.
included.
Okay.
yeah.
Maybe I should be the funnel for.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really efficient for the chair to be the funnel, so that if there are multiple questions, she can kind of consolidate them.
Gotcha.
And, even if multiple people are asking the same question, right, she can certainly consolidate, make sure it's only one time that the superintendent needs to address it. Yeah.
And is that specific to requesting information?
Say more.
Individual members requesting information from the superintendent. So that was the topic
Yep.
that we're talking about. But
Yep.
what about, I'd like to meet with Brian about this topic. And I don't think do I have to go through the chair to make a,
I think
Meeting
that's what
with-
she was saying, that we can't do that anymore.
I think at least that would be copying the chair to make sure that they're
right,
in the loop, and then maybe collectively to say, let's put this on a future agenda instead, or,
I mean, I'm wondering if it's related specifically to a subcommittee that you're on that I'm not on, then you should probably be bringing that up.
and I think I'm going back to when I was first elected and you weren't chair and Greg was chair, and I'd say, well, what about this? Well, I don't know, call Brian and ask him about that.
Right.
You can approach Brian about that. So I don't think it's,
So was it, were you seeking information, or were you sort of thinking about, here's an idea to put forward?
I don't
Or,
even recall the
yeah,
initial topic.
But what I don't think anybody wants is a wall between the school committee and the superintendent. So I think those conversations are fine, and then it's sort of me, my responsibility as the gatekeeper, if an issue comes forward. To the earlier point, you asked me a question, I said, yes, it will
Right.
be disseminated to the entire school committee. If somebody else wants to come in and we've had conversations over time, and let the chair know.
well, and I think, if it's a topic, in terms of that, like that good communication, if it was a topic where Brian felt like, well, maybe this is not a conversation to have with one member, he could bring it to the chair and say, is this an agenda item, or, without kind of having, I can't think of a good example, so.
This
But
is
I
what
think
you were
so-
going back to what you were saying earlier, is that we as committee members cannot meet with him individually.
We can.
No, that's,
Oh.
Just that-
don't take that as that.
Oh.
But that specific example of bringing, I want a change in something that is not necessarily under the purview of the committee, is where that scenario kind of fell.
Okay.
It wasn't, you probably have a lot of questions about how does it work? I don't understand, like the goals, right? Can you give me some examples of some other goals? Nothing wrong with talking to him or meeting with him to get information to help you do your job.
Okay.
It's trying to do his job that was the issue in that first scenario. Does that make
Oh,
sense?
Okay, yeah. Mhm.
So if I want to meet with you about something, maybe about athletics, I think I will say to Kate, I want to talk to Brian about this. I was thinking about scheduling a meeting, and that way you know, because if anybody else wants to talk about the same thing, then it's a her
Right.
collective topic. So that's probably the way to do it. Just let the chair know, this is what I'm wanting to discuss with Brian, I think I'll call him for a meeting. Sound good? Okay.
As long as it doesn't cross the scenario 2 line.
Right.
I mean, it just
I mean,
in
that guy
in
is a
general, with any,
bonehead.
right?
Right, it has to, if you're meeting with him about athletics, it has to be like in relation to the school committee role,
Right,
not using the power of the school committee to make requests.
right. I used athletics as
An example, yeah.
an example, not a,
Preschool,
right,
we've talked preschool.
right.
So we kind of bundled information and action together there, I think. And I think that, in the other scenario, talking about that an individual member can't request action from the, give direction to the superintendent. Direction comes from the committee as a whole. How about requesting information directly from staff?
We don't do that.
I don't think we
The
have an
times we've
issue
done
with
it,
that.
I think it's copied Brian on it, like when we did the walkthrough of the schools before they opened. We copied Brian on that. I think that's the only thing been intentional or discussed ahead of time. I can't think
That, what do you mean by information? Like, we don't,
Well, so we'll use Andy as an example again. Suppose he had called the principal and said, I really feel like our kids aren't going to the colleges they should. Can you get me 10 years of information about where kids have been accepted? So,
I don't think that's an issue here. I think
yeah.
okay,
people know.
yep.
I think we're doing it.
So then I'm going to assume that action from staff is also not an issue.
Same.
Okay.
I don't think that's an
Yep.
issue.
And I think in the discussion we just had, I think we kind of covered the board superintendent communication between meetings.
I think we did have an incident, last year where there was a couple of things that were urgent and, communication, I know with the security incident, it got out pretty quickly and you called the chair. The other one was a personnel issue and it was just bad timing because it happened on a Friday and all of a sudden community people are telling people about it. And I remember the response was, I needed to go through the chain. I wasn't, I honored the notice not to tell people before then, and then you were waiting to get a hold of the chair. So I think at some point, like, kind of and you didn't get the chair, but it's, like, at some point, maybe the circumstances, I need to just let the whole committee know, as opposed to just letting the chair or the chair and the vice chair know, because I felt like we kind of got caught in an incident in that one, it's not a
I think
repeat.
I ended up texting the committee, because I would have had to make 6 different phone calls.
Right. But, had it been just a universal announcement, before 5 o'clock, maybe it could have. But I don't think it's a repeat issue. I think it was just maybe something we can learn from.
Okay. So in terms of when things aren't issues, and do you feel like there's a good flow of communication between the superintendent and the rest of the committee between meetings? Like to get information for meetings, or if there are issues, feel like you're informed?
I don't think we do a lot of communication, but
We do, I mean, I remember you've told me a couple times you sent something out, be it the school safety audit report or something, and you said to me, I haven't heard anything from any committee members, so, which maybe is good. But people should know, like I think I emailed you back my kind of
Yeah.
first impressions and thoughts about it. So I don't know if you're looking for more from us when you.
Only when it's good.
Acknowledgement is good, so that I know it didn't go
Got
into
your
a junk
email,
bin
okay.
somewhere. No, I think my perspective, I think we communicate as necessary in between meetings, because we have a lot of subcommittees. And so we meet regularly, and there's a lot of information flow that way. In terms of, hey, I put this document in the folder, folks to take a look at, things like that. So I don't know that that's an issue, other than, like Kate said, the acknowledgement that, yeah, I got this.
I don't think it's a huge issue. I think that there are cases when we can, individually, collectively try to get things in the meeting folders in a timely manner. Like, there's been a couple times that, like, I show up and I try to be checking the folder before meetings. I'm sure other people too. And then it's like, oh yeah, in that document. I'm like, there was that document? Oh yeah, it was added like a minute ago. And I know that's not the usual, but just, I think
I
collectively
did
we can.
that to you today, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I wasn't talking about you or anything.
Would be something to strive for, to have the meeting folder current, at ideally 24 hours before the meeting if we can. Because I know Thursday's my busiest day at work. So sometimes, so I try to review the meeting folder in the morning or the night before. So it is nice to not have to scramble.
I think as long as we have the bulk of the materials in there, because tonight was a perfect example. So literally this afternoon, late this afternoon, I got those updated pictures from Frank in town to upload into the system, and I asked Laura at, I don't know, 4 something, to pop them into the folder. To your point, it's not, we didn't have them yesterday.
Something major, but maybe if it's something major, maybe we could circulate it, hey, I just
Yeah.
put something in the
Oh, yeah.
folder at
Yep.
5:30.
So when I started my, however 20 whatever years ago it was, we all had paper packets.
Right.
So you knew when you got the packet, it was everything that there was going to be, right? Which kind of made it easier. I think there's tons of easier, better reasons to have things electronically, but the ability to think that the ability to drop things in so you feel you've reviewed everything and then, hey, wait, I didn't see this, or it just got added, is a sort of a little bit of a pitfall of the electronic packet. So the objective of, saying we have an objective to get everything in 24 hours ahead, 48 hours ahead, whatever it is a kind of a good expectation, I think, for everybody to have. Use of social media. It sounded like you got that one down from the 10 minutes I heard before the.
We're working on it.
Social media norms that I think the committee adopted several years ago, and then we just updated an addendum because we decided to have a social media presence that we're sort of very cautiously dipping into the social media world, but I think we're being thoughtful about it. And I have never seen any issues of individual members on their own accounts being inappropriate. I mean, I don't spend a ton of time on social media, but I think we're all pretty aware of being a little quiet on social media in your personal, not weighing in on things in your personal account.
Okay. And so handling emails and other communications from constituents, we talked about it a little bit as we were going through the scenarios. Anything more to think about or add? Thoughts on that?
I think one of the things that we've tried to clean up over the last couple of years is when constituents are emailing individual school committee members, that they get redirected to the chair, and the chair makes a formal response on behalf of the school committee. One of the concerns that I've had is I'm not always included in those. So sometimes there's emails flying around, and I have no idea that they're even out there unless somebody makes me aware of it. That's been a concern, and going back, that also ties into the communication between board members. We have to be careful that we're not making decisions or preempting conversations before a board meeting. Well, early on in my career, the school committee used to, this was many, many years ago, 20-plus years ago, the school committee members would get together in the parking lot and make the decisions before they came in to sit at the board. This is in New Hampshire, this is a long time ago. But now we're in the information age, and I just worry that,
Yeah.
that there's communication between school committee members on private
Yeah.
emails, that we have to be careful about that.
Yeah, so you want to be.
And it
that-
has
I mean,
happened.
Yeah, that, be aware of the open meeting law, right? Be aware that you make your decisions in the meeting, not in the parking lot before the meeting. I once knew a reporter who covered a Board of Selectmen, and he said they got together in the room outside the meeting room and went through the whole meeting and made all the decisions. He said, but they let me, as the reporter, stand in the room. And then they would go and they would always explain all their decisions before they formally made them. He said, so I never really had a problem with that. But parking lot's a little bit more of a, unless you're letting the reporters.
Plus years ago, my early days as a superintendent.
Yep, probably before the open meeting law was as much of a, so you want to be aware not to be sharing, opinions. You can share information with each other, but you don't want to be sharing opinions, and you particularly don't want to do what is considered a serial deliberation of, Jen talks to Kate, Kate talks to Jeff and says, well, Jen thinks this, and then, you build it up to a quorum, and the person who started the conversation is technically in violation of the open meeting law and doesn't even know it. So you want to be careful that you're having your discussions in public, where the public can hear your thoughts and your deliberations, and inclusive of everybody then, right? So that, the good thought that someone had who wasn't included in the email chain gets aired as well.
When I have not received an individual contact from anybody, but if one does, can they not respond with any information, but respond saying, I forwarded your email to the school committee and our chair?
Oh, you're talking about if something comes from a parent, not from a fellow school committee member?
Right, yeah, from
Yeah.
someone who
Yep.
just,
Yep,
they
you
know one
absolutely
of
can,
us or
yes, you
whatever.
absolutely can
And then just
respond.
at least respond to say.
To acknowledge that you-
it
yes,
and that it's
absolutely.
been passed on and that
Absolutely,
our chair will respond. Okay.
You can
absolutely.
usually say, it's our policy that the chair responds. So
Right.
it's not like you're
Yeah.
passing the buck. That's
Right,
just-
right, right.
that's our-
Yeah.
That's
our
the way
policy,
we
yeah.
do things.
I mean, yeah, you certainly want to let people know if they've sent a question or a concern to you that you didn't just ignore it, right?
Right.
That you're addressing it.
And I've struggled as chair sometimes, because if it just comes from a community member, I think we've been pretty good in the last year and a half about when the chair responds, I do CC everybody with the understanding that then you don't, it's not like a conversation. I'm just CCing
Do not
you
reply
for
all.
awareness.
Yep.
So you know how I responded. But I have trouble, sometimes it's a community member and they're emailing us, and they're emailing the principals, and they're emailing the select board, and they're emailing the town manager, and I'm like, who's going to respond to this? And so that's
Well,
something
some of it is, whose purview is it under?
Right.
Right? If they're emailing you about things that are, the town's park, right? It might be across from the school, but it's the town's park, then that's not really within your purview to address.
Right.
But if it is a school issue, then that would be the place to start. And hopefully, if it's, if they're emailing people other than the school committee about a school issue, hopefully if they get any response from the select board or whoever, that they're directed to the appropriate place.
Yeah.
And not an attempt to respond.
Right, yeah. And so I did appreciate the middle school principal. No, sorry, one of the new elementary school principals responded and said, not to the citizen, but to everyone else involved, and said, just so everybody knows, I'm going to respond to this person tomorrow. I'm on it, which was nice. I didn't have to respond, and he responded. And it was good.
So if sorry to keep.
No.
If an email is sent out, or questions, or someone's feelings, or whatever, and they send it to the entire committee, and it's acknowledged, and can we give our thoughts to Kate on a response? Or it's just Kate speaks for
Well,
the
so
entire committee?
Kate can, I mean, certainly
we need
pass
to be
people.
unified, I
Right.
know.
Kate can certainly pass on information if the person is emailing the committee, but the solution really lies someplace else. Kate can really only, she can't, she might say something's coming up on an agenda. She can't say the committee is considering this and I think this is what the committee will do, right? She can't speak, she can talk about decisions that have been made or pass on information, but she can't speak for the committee unless the committee has spoken.
Gotcha, okay.
Does that make sense? So,
Can we just go through that one more time? Because it doesn't happen often, but if we do get a one-off email to us or a subgroup of us, is the preference for, like, me to send it to you, Kate, and then you respond to everybody, including Dr. Blake, or do I send it to you and Dr. Blake, or do I send it to the whole committee? Like, I guess as a member who's not the chair, what do you want my first step to be?
Just forward it to me.
Both of you? Okay,
But when I respond, people will see the original.
okay. But I think in the past,
original
I've just
and
sent stuff to you, but moving forward, make sure I send it to both of you. Okay.
I think, sometimes when we start talking about email and communication, we can't parse out every single path. You sort of have to use your judgment a little bit. And if you have a question, call Kate, call
Yeah.
Brian and say, what's the best way to handle this? Until you sort of get into the flow of how things get handled.
Yeah, this phone call is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to get texts from Greg all the time. Do you have a minute for a call? Yep. And then got for a few minutes to kind of figure out, the best way to handle a situation. Not the answer, but, the procedural part of it.
Have we, in the discussion so far, have we sort of talked about chain of communication? Is that an issue, or are people pretty clear? I mean, it sounds like there's at least developing clarity, so.
I think developing clarity is a good description.
Handling confidential information.
I haven't had any issues with that. I think you're pretty good about if you circulate something that's for our eyes only, you say it. And that,
A lot of times it'll be in print only, and then I collect them when we're done.
a preliminary report on something
Yeah.
that's not public quite yet.
Or executive session, people are aware. What happens in executive session stays in executive session.
Yeah.
There's that trust.
Yep,
Yep.
absolutely. Yep, yep.
And I'm hypersensitive about confidentiality issues with staff and students. So there's probably times when I'm too leery about that. I don't know if you can,
I
but
don't think you can be.
I'm hypersensitive to that and protecting the staff and students.
I heard mention of school visits, so it sounds like that was school visits before the schools open to sort
Yeah, the
of
school
make sure
inspections,
they're ready
that's
to
what I
be
was thinking,
open and, yeah.
Walkthroughs.
Yep, yep.
And I think we're pretty clear. We have an orientation of new members where we are pretty clear, if you're going to visit a school as a parent, you say that when you reach out to them, and you're always obviously allowed as a parent to visit schools, and you're allowed as a school committee member, but
Yeah, just a,
Yep.
it's not even
Sure, just-
permission, it's just
yeah,
a
just
courtesy that,
awareness,
I'm
yeah.
going
Yep.
in.
Okay. Shall we jump up to before meetings then? So developing and placing items on the agenda, has that been an issue?
We've had a couple of different ways this has happened in the past few years, and it seems to just change. And I don't know what's best. At one point, it was just if you had something, you emailed the chair. And then there was a time where the chair would send out a meeting prior to the agenda setting meeting, saying, we're meeting if you have something you want to, and now it's sort of, I think maybe some committee members probably feel more comfortable than others reaching out.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your preference is about how do you want to solicit input?
I don't know. I mean, so we meet on Thursdays and we typically have agenda meetings the prior Friday, usually morning. So, I mean, I guess I'd rather, unless everybody wants me to, and then I will, I guess I'd rather not have to send out an email on Monday saying we're meeting for agenda planning on Friday if you, I mean, I could. It was nice when Chubb did that. It's just kind of a reminder, but I feel like everyone should feel free to know. Basically, the week before a meeting is sort of your time to, give me a call or shoot me agenda items, knowing that agenda items are the discretion of the chair. Feel comfortable doing that, reaching out?
Yeah, and sometimes, because I reached out to you for one, and we ended up just being able to, it wasn't necessary for a discussion or a vote.
Right.
And we discussed it, and it was much simpler than having it to go on an agenda, so.
Okay. Getting questions answered before a meeting. So this is, sort of getting your packet, having questions as you look through the packet, knowing you can reach out to whoever to make sure your question is addressed at the meeting or whatever. Or, sometimes for new members, the questions may just be, I don't understand these 62 acronyms in here. Can you help me out? So that you can, like simple questions that might, if you can get them answered before the meeting, help the flow of the meeting, because they're more, I'm new, I don't understand, or I need a reminder about something, as opposed to, what we were talking about earlier, there are questions that you may want to ask, and if someone knows ahead, they can be prepared to answer them at the meeting, or prepared to incorporate it into their presentation, helps you move your business along better. And it prevents that sort of gotcha that a presenter might feel if they didn't know a question was coming.
That's the piece where I think having materials far enough advanced to ask some of those. We had that with, was it the handbook? There was a couple of questions, and we got resolved either ahead of time or immediately in because we knew.
Yep.
So that's where I think having stuff ahead of time helps.
Yep. And we had an issue a couple weeks ago with we were reviewing the warrant for town meeting, and we had some questions on some warrant articles. And that was kind of my fault. We had our warrant meeting before the other two boards did, so in hindsight, we probably should have had our warrant meeting after those two boards so we could learn from the discussions at those boards. But, so that's just something I learned to schedule that later next time so that we have more information. Because they weren't really warrant articles we would have needed presentations on, but we could have watched the select board meeting and then just had much more information when we were voting on those articles. So it's just timing.
So in that, have we covered receiving supporting materials before the meeting and talking about getting questions answered and so forth? At the meeting, boardroom layout. Is this your typical boardroom layout? So oftentimes when I go through this exercise and this is not the layout, I get little pictures of, we wish this was the layout. Little pictures drawn on the back of the sheet.
And the camera's there, so we are all visible.
Three camera views so that it captures the whole table.
I have a question about that, and I'm ready to be in the minority, but I don't love our layout. Like, I feel like we're super far away and it's really hard to like read cues, and I'll like start talking when somebody else is talking. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize you were about to go. Do you find, do any committees sit a little closer?
Could we be closer?
I mean, I think it
Three
depends
to a
on the.
table versus two. If we can get cozy, but
What if we could do something like this? See what I'm drawing.
Or like a
Um,
circle.
I see.
Yeah,
So
like
more
half of
angled
a-
instead of a U. Yeah,
Half of a,
yeah, something.
yeah,
you
Yeah.
know, there.
yeah. I have
there.
seen like the tables are, it's been too long since high school geometry. The tables, longer on one side, shorter on the other, angled.
This is
We
what I was
normally
thinking.
have,
Table.
I think 3 to a table would be, I just have stuff.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
you
other-
want to
that's
have
the
the
other
room to
piece
spread
we-
out too.
We tend to spread out.
Yeah.
I don't know that we, with all of my stuff here and materials and yours, that we could put another person in between, right?
I mean, one thing we could do better about in terms of like cues and who's going next. I mean, I think I'm supposed to sort of,
Call.
call on
Yeah.
people, or things are supposed to go through me. So maybe if people do, I don't want to do like formal hand raising, but if people sort of make eye contact with me or do a little nod, I can try to be better about facilitating who's going, so it's not interrupting.
Yeah, I think, that this is where the chair can really make a difference in having the meeting run smoothly and making sure everybody gets a chance. So if, that sort of, Kate may say, first Jenny, then you, right? If she sees multiple people want to speak, say, that's the order it'll be, or,
Because we haven't really done that, because I don't feel like I need to. But if that would help, sort of
Yeah,
find people out, I'm happy to do that.
I don't want to like be more formal than it needs to either. I feel like we tend to have a good flow, but I don't know. It
Yeah,
might be a
I-
me problem, but I feel
Would it
like it's
help
really
you-
far from here.
Would you feel differently if you sat?
Yeah, or
There?
just have a different seat.
Who wants to switch?
We could put
Yeah, I'm
Jimmy at
happy
the
to
end.
I'm happy to switch
Next
too.
time, even
We'll
one
try it
closer,
out,
maybe.
sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to switch. I also was going to say, if there, other than the physical layout of who's at what table or the positioning, if there's other things, other things there that we can do to improve
Right.
on it, I think we're all for that too.
Yep.
Better about that, personally.
give it a try and see if it works, and change it up if it doesn't, try something else.
Let's switch seats next time.
Thanks. Curious to see how it goes.
Try a whole other side.
It's hard in the winter, though, because there's that fan up there
Ooh.
that when I sat there, I felt like no one could ever
Okay,
hear
heads
me.
up, yeah.
But, so that might be tricky hearing you. But we'll try.
Especially with your soft
With your
voice.
soft voice, so, but we'll try.
Structure the agenda. An issue, or does it work for everybody?
I thought about it. Are you intentional about the sequence of the items on the agenda?
We have the agenda that has always been around to be,
Yeah,
since I've
it's
been here.
had minor tweaks over the years, but
Well,
no
I mean-
major,
No, I mean meeting over meeting. Like, how did you decide that like overnight trip was going to be the first thing? Are you thinking about that?
Oh, okay, I think.
yeah,
This
we
week
we
was a
do,
little bit
we do
different.
to some
Teachers,
degree. If
especially
it
teachers.
involves teachers or kids, I try to, or administrators, I try to put those items on early to get them out of here and let them get home.
Not that
Okay.
we want to get them out of here, but they've had a long day, they deserve to go home
Okay.
at 7:30. But other than that, not really.
I don't know if it's been intentional, also like today, but it was just part of the nature of today. Some of those ones that are also quick administrative ones, like sometimes just knocking those out quickly early, I think has been helpful too. I think it's, again, I don't know if that's been intentional. I've noticed that. Maybe it's just coincidence.
Do you use a consent agenda?
We do, yep.
We do, but very limited. Minutes,
Warrant?
warrant, Gifts, accepting gifts, the next meetings, maybe, things like that.
Yep. Yep, okay.
I did go to the MASC Summer Institute last summer, and one of the things we talked about was agendas, and I have some examples from some different towns that I'd be happy to share with anybody that wants, that I thought were very different than ours. And sometimes they even had agenda items that linked to like this is how this agenda item links to this goal, which was kind of interesting. So maybe I'll just circulate those and we can,
Yeah.
got it.
I think last year I felt like we had some stumbling blocks about citizens' comments and how long they are. And I know from history prior to being on this committee, there used to be a table in the back, sometimes with refreshments for citizens, but the copy of the paper agenda was there. And I felt like it was a nice way to greet the public that comes in, and maybe that we could reinstate that. I don't know. But also, would it help us and the public who are arriving for citizens' comments to have some ground rules announced at every meeting or on the top of the agenda, so that when it's over there in the corner for them to take, there's an understanding of what we're doing. This is an open meeting that they can comment on but not participate in with us. I feel like maybe that would help everybody.
That it's
Yeah.
televised,
Yep.
I don't know if, people,
Well, you should announce at every meeting if the meeting is being televised or recorded. They're probably being recorded too, right?
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's, I can go into a long story, but you should, if people are being televised or recorded, they should know, right? Sort of, that what they're saying is more than just in this room. It's sort of an eavesdrop law, actually.
It's interesting because we all know that all of our meetings are recorded and either live streamed or recorded and played at a later date on ICAM. That's an expectation of the community. People making presentations to the school committee typically know that as well. It's the general public that may or may not be aware of that.
Yep, yep. And I think to your point about, we often, or we do recommend that at the beginning of public comment, the chair say, this is how public comment works, or printing it on the agenda, both, right? So that partly because people know the expectations, and partly because it helps you be consistent, right? No matter what the topic, no matter what the viewpoint is, you want to be consistent in how the public is treated is not the right word, but that, everyone gets the same chance to speak, whether, no matter what their viewpoint is.
And I wouldn't read that unless there were citizens here, or would I just read it?
Correct.
Okay.
I think we did put that as a communications subcommittee goal for this year. And I think the expectation maybe is that we do repeat it even if there's somebody here, not here, but, if we say we allocate 15 minutes for citizens' comments, and that way, there's nobody here today, but if there's 30 people here next meeting, and there is an issue that's more controversial, we've already established what the benchmark doesn't seem we're curtailing speech because there's an issue that's more.
like, we're not just saying that because this is going to be a hot topic.
Right.
When you say 15 minutes that's not 15 minutes per person. Well, I mean, I know that, but,
The language probably needs to be.
just the,
Three,
yeah,
It's
3
usually
minutes
3
per
minutes.
person.
Yeah.
And we were also hoping in the goal to make it so that if somebody does make a comment and it's not on our agenda, that it doesn't just get filed somewhere, but we have a mechanism of being able to revisit it so that, again, they feel heard, we're engaging and not just listening and then not.
Well, I think a misunderstanding happens when the public thinks that they're here to engage and have a conversation with us
Right,
during our meeting and during the comment session.
Well, so
We're here to
even
listen, but not-
during the, even as you're talking about what public comment is, to say this is not a time when we will be, we won't, however you say it, there won't be a response, we won't be engaging. This is our chance to hear you, not to deliberate with you.
Yeah. So again, at that Summer Institute, when we looked at those other agendas from other districts, they did have some language right in their agenda template that I think was really nice. So I think that's something we could definitely do.
That's why we're going to take it up in the communications subcommittee. Maybe if you could share those, we could take a look at them and then bring back recommendations.
Yeah, if you give me a heads up what meeting you might talk about that.
Tell you right now.
Over 12th.
Yeah.
I mean, your next one, or you want to like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I will give you those. And another question I had that has been an issue before is, it's citizens' comments, but sometimes people have really pointed questions. And sometimes we can answer them right away, and sometimes we can't. And so that's always tricky because then other people say, well,
You
you're not
answered my
answering the
Right.
question. Or you answer their question, you're not answering my question. And so that gets a little tricky sometimes.
I think, again, I think you have to figure out a way to be consistent. I mean, if something is like a super easy, quick answer, information, right? They're just looking for quick information.
Right.
What's the last day of school?
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's different than someone asking a more pointed,
What are you going to do about?
yeah. So I think, getting back to what you said about the mechanism for getting back to people, it might be the same mechanism whether it's a question or a comment, particularly if it's things that aren't on the agenda.
We had several meetings last spring where there was sort of a heated topic and people did not feel heard. So that's hard when we can't engage in a dialogue, but they were heard. So it's trying to convey that we heard them is tough when we're not having a back and forth dialogue.
Yep. So that may be when it ends, if it was a topic that wasn't on the agenda, that it might be something you consider as a future agenda item so that they, even though they're not going to be a give and take with them, that they do hear the response, right, or the opinions of the committee. So the line we always use is it's a meeting in public, not with the public.
I do have a follow-up question. So say during citizens' comments, somebody makes a comment, it's not a dialogue, but one of us, maybe I have a question for that person to better understand their comment. Is that considered a dialogue, and should I not?
And that's frustrating.
Yes.
Well, again, that may be the, figuring out how you engage differently when it's, outside of the public comment.
Can you encourage them to send an email
Oh,
to
yeah.
the school committee? And then have it go through that channel?
Because then we can respond.
Yep. And if there's something to follow up on and you have a question, it may be talking to Kate or Brian and say, that person, I had a question for this person, and figure out how to go from there.
This came up, like we said, we were talking about all of this in our communications subcommittee. If somebody comes to us with whatever issue, and they're like, I want the school committee to talk about this, of course we say, well, you need to bring it up to school committee, not me. What is the best avenue for them to come to public comment or for them to send an email?
I mean, to me, either avenue should get them to the same place, right? To me, either avenue should be able to work for them.
Like with email, I feel like there tends to be more of a response or acknowledgement. But again, like with public comment, we just stare back, Figure that one out.
Might be something as, simple as at the end of public comment, we will take comments under consideration.
And it could be a comment that they want the town to hear, as opposed to just to get their own response,
Right.
They want to just make a statement,
Yep.
really.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. So, yeah, they'd rather have it when they know it is televised and recorded.
right.
As opposed to an email, yeah. Where did we go? So, we kind of jumped ahead to public input. Length of meetings and deliberation at meetings. Any issues there?
Not really. I think we manage the meetings pretty well. We have some meetings where, we typically start at 7. And some meetings we're out by 9. Sometimes we push 10 or 11.
11's unusual.
Unusual now, but
Yeah,
but I think
September.
that's evolved over time.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, we don't always know the public that is coming, so public comment can take longer. Some of our discussions go on much longer than we anticipate on any given agenda item. And so that when we're doing agenda planning and we're sitting and we're saying, okay, this conversation should take 20 minutes and this presentation will be, 15 minutes, and we add it up and we're like, okay, we should be out of there by 9 o'clock. And then that 20-minute presentation, by the time the presentation happens and then questions and answers, it's 50 minutes. And all of a sudden, we're way off the agenda. But I don't think it's anything intentional, and we try to manage the development of the agenda to account for that.
I think in the subcommittees, at least, we had a recent meeting where I think we all acknowledged that the agenda that were there, we were not going to cover everything. But I think maybe just making sure that we're building sort of reasonable agendas, that we're not going to touch it. Maybe just putting it in the to-do or something like that, so we're, I mean, particularly just the number of meetings everybody has, kind of honoring those time commit, the 1 hour or whatever, 90 minutes, whatever the agenda's set for.
Subcommittee meetings, yeah.
a little bit easier to do in a subcommittee, I think, than in the regular
I
committee
think,
meeting.
new members are excited and we want to tackle a lot.
Yep.
A lot of it's just figuring out the cadence of
Yep.
what's an appropriate number of.
Well, and I think this year in particular, because of the various subcommittee work that's going on and the anticipation of negotiating of contracts, what I've been trying to do with folks is to stack our meetings so that we don't have much choice, but we have an hour and a half, or we have an hour for this meeting, and that's it, because I have another one that some of us may need to get to. And that's intentional to compartmentalize some of the time and the nights out for all of us, and anticipating that, at some point, we're going to start negotiating contracts, and that's going to be another drain on time. So I think that's another way to do that, is to design it so that we have to limit our time.
Would we ever start earlier, even like 6:30?
Usually if you have an executive session, we'll start early, but
Okay, not,
generally not. I think it's just been 7.
Doesn't mean that can't change. I will not be opposed to starting it earlier. I was here at 7 o'clock this morning for Rotary, so,
I'm around, but
It's hard to get here at 6.
yeah,
6 was,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I have a question, Dorothy. Brian is really good about being present at every meeting, everything in that pack, a lot of things at this hour. Is the superintendent supposed to be at every subcommittee meeting?
That I think is a decision that you make together. I think that there are subcommittee meetings where the presence of the superintendent can be immensely helpful. And there may be other ones, like communications subcommittee, if you're, maybe I think it depends on the subcommittee,
Yeah,
and it depends
obviously
on what
budget
you, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think you sort of, that's something you guys have to work out together. If there are ones where it makes sense for him to stop in or not be at every single one, or,
You're a liaison to many, many things as well.
True.
IEF, you go to,
do. I do. I just feel like that I've always been part of every subcommittee meeting, even communications. I mean, we had, just as an example, we had concern, we were gonna put a picture in the newsletter going out, and I said, no, can't do that. We've got kids in there, so I worry about if I'm not there to be part of the conversation, not that I'm steering anything, but to be part of the conversation, I don't want the school committee to put themselves in
Yep. Yep,
as lay people in a tough spot.
right, right,
That's just
right.
and you have the most institutional knowledge
Yeah.
of all of us. So
Well,
I think
that's
we
very
don't
clear.
want you steering our they are our subcommittee meetings.
Yeah.
So I think,
Yeah, I think that's, again, I think that's something you have to decide amongst yourselves. And if the comfort level is yes, then that's the way it is.
So if a subcommittee meeting got scheduled and all of a sudden you couldn't make it, obviously if it's budget, if it's something that requires your institutional knowledge, but it also could take place. There's
it's
no,
not like required
there's
by law,
not
if that's what you're-
Massachusetts law that says
No.
superintendent is a member of each school committee, subcommittee.
No, that's not law or regulation.
Okay.
That's a
It is in
local
your
decision.
contract that you will attend all school committee meetings, but it doesn't specify subcommittees necessarily, so.
What about staff presentations?
I love them. I tried this summer to try to have us line up staff presentations for the year at our summer retreat, and it didn't really, but we tried. Just to give staff enough time and to really be thoughtful about, like, what do we need to learn more about? Do we want like an MCAS presentation? Do we want our director of special education to give us a presentation? So I would like to have more thoughtful planning of staff presentations personally.
I think we had mentioned, or I'd mentioned the grants, having the recipients that have put the funds to use, and so they could present, the
The outcomes.
the outcomes, yeah. So
How
I
the-
think that would be
Yeah, how the
good
grant money is
amount
being used.
of people to work with.
And I think we could look at our goals and see if there are any logical presentations. Like for example, that math curriculum change, we did have our two math specialists from the elementary schools come in and give us a really nice presentation on illustrative math, and we were like doing math problems, and I found that really helpful to sort of understand the curriculum change and have them explain to us how specifically they hoped it would impact student achievement. So that presentations like that I found really useful.
So you had mentioned going to the workshop and talking about like tying agenda items to the goals, and that you just sort of mentioned it again, like, does the presentation help us understand our goals are being implemented, right? Which is another way to look at it. Often, and you guys aren't saying it, so I'm assuming it's not a problem, but oftentimes people get to staff presentations and the reaction is, they're too long. And if they get long, I feel like sometimes the school committee has to take responsibility for that, because you haven't been clear to the staff about what you really want to hear about. And if they just have, I'd like a presentation about special education. Well, that's a pretty big, broad, so what exactly is it that you, the school committee, are interested in hearing about, so the person can streamline their presentation to give you the information that you're actually looking for? So that's, I think it can be helpful to the presenters when they have a little bit more direction than make a presentation on X. Technology devices at the meeting table. So this is really more geared toward, I think your flashlight is on your phone.
Flashlight is
Right on cue.
Speaking of which, good eye.
on your battery.
This is really more geared towards inappropriate use of technology at the meeting table, like your phone down underneath, texting each other, or texting members of the community or whatever. Because I see you all have technology devices at the table, and I know you're bringing up the material for the meeting. So,
One of the things that I went to the presentation, the training, over the summer, and you had spoken, if it was you or another presenter, but when that does happen, it could be a personal, something that you have to attend to.
Yep.
You have to say, because I think that what was said is someone can question that.
Yep.
And so to say,
Someone can
I
put in a
apologize,
FOIA
that was-
request for the
that was
texts
a
that were sent.
personal
Someone
whatever.
can put in a FOIA request for the text or the email that they saw you reading on your phone.
Right,
I don't know if you remember that the Boston School Committee got in a lot of trouble
yeah,
when people realized they were texting back and forth
right.
um,
So you
during a
just say
Zoom
what,
meeting.
not like what it was, but,
Yeah,
if it was a personal thing or had nothing to do with, and, you would only do that in an emergency situation, but
yeah.
just say, I
And I,
apologize.
even at the beginning, if you have, your kids are home alone that evening or something, you might say, I just have my phone out because, in case my kids need me or something like
Right.
that, then,
So acknowledge it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is the recommendation for us to not have our phones out, though? Would that be better?
that would be best. Yep. Yep, then there can't be a question, right?
I mean, I started
I have
texting
heard
at the
about
beginning
committees
of the
that have a
meeting,
basket
but
where
I-
everybody drops their phone in as they
You
enter
did.
the meeting.
Yeah.
Texting the,
Volleyball
right.
coach, 'cause he
Right.
was
Yep,
Yeah.
My calendar.
Yeah.
That's what I'm using it for.
I think we're pretty good, but we could be
Yeah.
better.
yeah, okay.
I often get a technical update. My daughter said tonight,
Yeah, that's happened to me, too.
the orchestra, I'm watching the meeting and I can hear the orchestra. I said, weird.
Wow.
From
Can
the
you hear
booth.
us and
the
the woman
booth.
presenting? Yes, it's like background music. There might be a mic in the pack. Who knows? So, anyway,
But we
I
have
did
gotten
check it
texts
because I
before,
thought,
I can't hear
Yeah.
the meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
We just lost sound or.
Yep, yep, and that can be helpful.
Yeah.
That can be helpful.
can I have a question?
Yes.
If, say, the phone is out, the family like you need to really attend to something, is it inappropriate to say, I need to attend to this?
And leave the table?
Yep.
And just go out and just
That
do
is
it? Okay,
totally appropriate,
okay.
totally appropriate. And probably less distracting than,
Yes.
yeah. Yep. Bringing up new ideas. I feel like we talked about that a little bit as we have gone through.
Like topic ideas?
Yeah.
At meetings,
Yeah. Sort of more in the line of, do people feel that they are, first of all, do people feel free to express their ideas? Secondly, is it an issue that new ideas that maybe are irrelevant to the agenda kind of start to get you off track in your discussions?
I don't think anybody at this table is worried about expressing new ideas. We do that quite frequently. I don't know if it pulls us off our agenda. I don't believe so, but I think folks are comfortable enough that we talk new items, we talk new ideas. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
We usually have new business at the end, but I have to say, I don't get creative with suggesting ideas at this table. I feel like,
I mean, we should be sticking to our agenda. We
Oh, yeah.
shouldn't be sticking.
Yeah, new ideas shouldn't
be
be
discussing.
something
We should
that's
be
not
stuck
on the
new
agenda
in
because that
theory,
would
but
be
not
wrong,
new
right?
ideas. Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, I think that's my job to then be like, all right, we're talking about this, maybe we can
Yep.
talk about that at another meeting.
Right.
Yep.
So new ideas about an agenda item,
Yep.
that's fine.
Where are we? Springing surprise items or questions?
We try to be pretty good about that, again, at that orientation, but, you know, trying to explain the
Yep.
no surprises rule, and it's, that's sort of that trust and respect.
Allowing majority to set the direction?
I mean, our committee hasn't really made big decisions yet, so, we'll see, but,
Personal items or vanity projects?
What do you mean by that?
So, I'll pick on this guy who wanted to change the math curriculum. Like, that was sort of this is my thing, I want to push, I want to push for my issue and not respect the will of the committee, but continue to push my agenda. Not seeing people say, oh, gee, that's a real big issue here. So, assuming not.
I think people would be redirected, hopefully. That's not the role of this committee, to fulfill your personal agenda.
I mean, there's a time when you're working on goal setting, right? That would be the time to talk about issues that you may hope that the committee would address and see if a majority agrees with you, right?
Yeah. And if it's in our purview, I have a personal agenda to get an elementary school building project passed at some point, but that's well within our purview, so.
Yep.
You know.
We've talked in and out about the open meeting law, so I'm not sure if we need to do anything more with that. So part of what, that kind of brings us to the end, right, because we did between meetings first. So part of what we talk about in terms of going through all these issues is thinking about what works well, right? And I know I saw on your website that you have a very short list of kind of very broad norms on the website. So, let's see if we can get this to work right. Probably not. Where'd my clicker go? So when we often talk to committees about establishing norms and protocols, a little bit more specifically than what you have, and I have some samples I can show you, and you probably have some, maybe from the workshop that you went to, Kate, I don't know, that sort of having, again, articulating some of those practices and procedures and so forth that work well for you, helps keep you on track and helps understand, this is how we've agreed we're going to operate, this is how we've agreed we're going to communicate. And then you can sort of dig into the work because you've figured out how you're going to do the work. We always hope that committees have some set of protocols and that they use that as sort of almost a self-evaluation, like, are we operating the way we said? Do we need to get ourselves back on track? And that they bring them out, that they become a little bit of a living document. They're not like buried in your policy book, but that you sort of keep them front and center and know that everyone is committed to them. So you can remind each other. And in an ideal world, when you have your reorganization meeting or at a summer retreat or something, you go through, you review them, everyone signs them and commits to the protocols. So I have some I can leave with you. I'm sort of also aware that we also want to talk about superintendent evaluation before it gets too late here. So did you have a question?
Just quick question around reorganization of the school committee. And this ties into the superintendent evaluation piece as well. So we have our election here in May. So we have a board turnover and potentially, well, we do have board member turnover typically in May. When should the school committee be reorganizing? And how does that play into the evaluation of the superintendent? But even down to nuts and bolts kinds of things, like who's signing diplomas when you have a reorganization that may happen? Is it the chair that's been the chair all year while those seniors were going through? Or is it the new chair that's been there a week or two after your reorganization? Or do you wait till the summer to do the reorganization? We've been around the block a few times on that.
So what does your policy say right now, for one thing?
Our policy says we have a reorganization in July, after the election,
And your election is in May.
mid-May.
And when if there are new members, when do they take office?
They are seated.
ASAP, the
Like,
next meeting,
the
if
next
they
meeting.
get sworn in.
Yeah.
in
2
time.
days after the election.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
as
got
long as they get
elected
sworn
on a
in by
Monday,
the-
and I showed up on
By the
Thursday.
town clerk, then they're
Yeah.
members of the school committee effective the next meeting.
So,
That, the norm?
yes. And, it's funny because there is one place that I know of where their elections are in the spring and they actually don't take office till July 1st, which seems utterly sensible to me
Right.
because
Agree with
you're aligning it to the fiscal year and the work.
Yeah.
Right, but most towns, it's, you're sworn in as soon as the election results are in, or the next day, and you're sitting at the table the next meeting. So does your policy allow for,
July? Yeah.
does your policy allow for who's chair if the chair is no longer on the committee?
I'd have to look at the policy, but I assume the senior.
You do an
member.
interim vote until the next organizational meeting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, does it work, does it work for you?
A little confusing this year.
Yeah.
It's a little confusing because this is the year we had 3 seats turnover. I mean, we have 2 seats one year, 2 seats the next year, and then 3 seats the third year is our cycle, because we have 7
Yep,
members.
yep.
So this was the 3-year turnover, and they all turned over. So we had 3 brand-new members and 2 members that had been here for a year.
And one was a member of the executive board, which hadn't happened before. There had always been, someone had stepped down. The 2 people that were on the executive board were continuing on, so we hadn't had that turnover until this year.
So in the scenario that you described, when they change in July, July 1, do the school committee members who they're essentially lame duck?
Yeah. So it's like,
until
it would
then,
be
so
like
they-
a city where you're.
They stay seated, it's not
Yeah,
their
so
last
it's like
meeting
a-
isn't
it's
the
like
night
a
of the
s-
election.
It's, first of all, it's their town charter, right? So the selectmen do the same thing. And secondly, it's like a city, right? You're elected in November and you're not sworn in until the 1st of January.
Sense.
So yes, you are a lame duck for,
That makes much more sense to me,
Allows
right?
the evaluation
Yeah.
and
Type of
the
process,
and
right.
reading of the evaluation and ultimately the salary and contract extensions, all the same people.
Right,
Yeah, it addresses all of that.
Yeah.
They could address graduation, they could sign
Right,
diplomas,
right.
even though they're not sitting school committee members.
One thing I found confusing last spring/summer is that we don't schedule meetings in July. We have our retreat in July, but we're supposed to reorganize or vote for a new chair in July. But we don't, like, I just pulled up our meetings for the year. Our last one is in June on the 20th.
Because that's the end of the fiscal year, and then we might have July meetings, but that's the next fiscal year, so it wouldn't be on that calendar. It would be on the beginning of the FY '24 calendar. So like we
We had
met
our retreat.
7/24, but that would be on, because the fiscal year turns over.
And it gives the newly elected members time to get acclimated to the issues, like really focus, because campaigning takes
Would they
is
get-
a lot. So to get back into the
the rhythm and really see it as, I'm going to be at that table, instead of just like knowing that you're going to be on the table. I feel like it's a different ball game than when you're running for something. You know, so it gives a newly elected person time to.
And I think we would encourage newly elected members to come to those May and June. We can't make them, you know,
Right.
if we're changing it, that they don't start until July. We would encourage them to come to
Of
those
course, yeah.
meetings.
Yeah,
Learn.
yeah. So they're up to date on, yeah.
And I also think that it would give even if they didn't run again, or the lame duck members that will end in June, at least it's, okay, but now we need to wrap up business, because there is fiscal business to wrap up. Those last meetings in June, and it's a responsibility to do that. And I think that makes perfect sense, and you're
And
not.
it's tough for the new members to be able to understand enough
Yeah,
about
to vote
it
and
to do
recuse
that.
themselves.
Right,
and-
absolutely.
Right.
It also would help address the situation we have this year with the executive board both being up for reelection, and should neither,
Neither of us run, we
There would be-
still follow through.
right, and potential like orientation to the new chair and vice chair.
We would need to find out how we could change that, and if it's
Yeah.
a change to the charter, which
Yeah,
town
it's
meeting needs to
Yeah,
approve.
yeah.
Yeah, it would probably be a charter change.
So what's the to-do on that? Like, is that something you're going to start looking into, Kate or Jeff, or?
I can take a look at that.
Charter change and then a policy change, right, for us?
Is that something, when is the tri-board? Like, is that too soon to go on this tri-board? Is it next tri-board?
Board agenda is set and posted.
Yeah,
Okay.
so- But we have other tri-board meetings. But I think I would probably just call,
I'll talk to Stephen tomorrow.
Feel it out.
We don't need to be in sync, but it would make sense that if we made a change across the town too. Discussion with the other boards.
Right, I know, maybe, I mean, it would line up with their fiscal year, but maybe they don't feel as strongly because they don't have a school year, that they're lining up with, but it'd be interesting at some point to hear their thoughts.
Yeah,
if we
and
had
they'd
done
run
it
into the
with-
same issues like you're saying.
Well, and in some towns, the election takes place before town meeting. So that means that new members are essentially defending a budget that they had no part of putting together, right? When they get to town meeting,
Mess.
yeah.
Something right.
It's not the most, I don't know how it came about, however many centuries ago, right? But anyway.
Great.
So are we ready to flip to superintendent evaluation? Do you want me to hand out the operating protocols? Take a little stretch?
I have one, I know.
I'll just say, Dorothy, I thought this was great. It might be something I suggest we take a look at on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Maybe like once a year, just to come back to, just from a norms and check in. How do we feel like it's going?
This piece?
Yeah, might be good, just general health for us.
Diana has a
Can you leave
question.
a blank one for me, and I can,
I left one with,
from that.
Kate, Diana has a question.
Yes.
If I may,
Diana.
over here.
Of course.
Super quick. It was kind of related to this, and I'll make it quick, but like, when we do our subcommittee meetings, in the agenda, there's that to-do section, and I know in all the ones I'm a part of, I feel like we really utilize that, and I'd love to see, and again, it kind of ties into citizens' comments or just things we talk about here, like, I think we're pretty good, but sometimes we like, oh, that's a good idea, and then it kind of just falls off. So if we hold ourselves accountable by, whether it's in the agenda or somehow I'd like to see some more formal tracking of, okay, we talked about this in a meeting, so what's the next step? Like,
So that would happen by us at a meeting. I'm thinking this is how it would work. We would convey action items to Laura to add to the minutes.
yeah, maybe at the end of the meeting, we just kind of say, all right,
You're gonna do
last
this,
step,
I'm
let's
gonna
go
do
through the
this.
to-dos, right?
Okay.
I like that suggestion.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure everybody
Kate's
reviews
gonna-
this ahead
or,
of the next meeting.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
stretch break.
Cool. Thank you.
5 minutes, and then we'll,
is there a Mac person who can help me flip PowerPoints?
yes.
I need
Lovely, I'm
snacks.
okay, thank you.
Use a snack.
Saving my appetite for a big bowl of ice cream.
You really gonna charge me $1?
The other one's on the flash drive, but I don't.
Would you like? I got some choices here.
I was joking with Laura before. I was like, on my way over, I was like, should I just pick up snacks for the group? I'm here. And then I was,
Sasha.
Just realizing that the first slide in this presentation.
Around, I have two of the same. Does anybody need a Melrose?
I ended up with, I knew I goofed on somebody, because I had more Sudbury left than Melrose left, so.
I have one of each.
Okay.
All right, so we are back from our break. Thank you. We are going to continue with our workshop.
All right. So the next topic is superintendent evaluation. And I just realized the first slide of my presentation was that goal pyramid, so I just skipped right over that. So superintendent evaluation, most of you probably know this, that there's an evaluation model system for all educators in Massachusetts that follows sort of the same pattern. It is through regulation. It came through the Achievement Gap legislation of 2013. The purpose of having this model for educator evaluation was to make sure that the evaluation of educators was more linked to student achievement than a lot of models that have been used in the past, as well as it being a strategy so that educators could continue to grow and improve their performance throughout their career. So kind of not just having, are you doing a good job, but how can we use the evaluation model to help you grow as an educator? For the superintendent, there are a couple things to keep in mind as we're thinking about this. It requires greater attention to the model for evaluation than a lot of places used in the past. And one of the things that I'll talk about going through is that the more attention you pay at the beginning of the process, the beginning of the cycle, the easier it's going to be all the rest of the way through, particularly at the end. Annual evaluations are required in most cases. For superintendents that have been in the position for 3 years or longer, you can use a 2-year cycle. The same way teachers on professional status are on a 2-year cycle. And there's a standard format that has to be used, but there's flexibility within that format to adapt things to your local district. So there's 3 key components to the model. The first is a 5-step cycle, the second is a 2-part tool, and then there's the third is a multi-part rating system. And I'll go through all 3 of those components, and then I'll talk about how it really works when you implement it. So the 5-step cycle starts and ends with a self-assessment. You might call it something different, sort of a state of the schools, or sort of, it's like we're at the end of the cycle, this is what was accomplished, this is where we are. And that's part of the information that you're going to use for the next goal setting, because you're going to take where you are and you want to grow from that. So that's why the self-assessment is kind of at the start and at the end. With that information, there'll be the goal setting and plan development, and obviously the plan gets implemented. Partway through the cycle, there's a mid-cycle or a formative review. This is not a written evaluation. It's really more of a check-in. It's a let's discuss where we are. Let's discuss, make sure everybody has the same understanding of what the goals are. If there's something that has changed significantly that might cause a change to the goal. For instance, a goal may have been predicated on a grant coming through and the grant didn't come through, so you can't make as much progress. You might want to realign the goal a little bit. So it's really just a chance for everybody to check in and ask questions. In an ideal world, this is not only the second time you're talking about the goals. Ideally, as Kate mentioned, sometimes on agendas, there's this presentation is related to this goal. Ideally, you're sort of getting updates on the goals as the year goes along, so that when you get to the end and you're ready to do the evaluation, you're really reviewing the knowledge that you've gained about the goal progress all year long, rather than thinking about it for the first time. And then at the end, there's the final evaluation, where the superintendent has the absolute pleasure of being evaluated in public. So, so the second part, the five-step cycle, two-part tool. The first part of the tool is goals. They're SMART goals. SMART goals are specific and strategic, measurable, action-oriented, rigorous, realistic, and result-focused, timed, and tracked. And goals have key actions and benchmarks. So you know what actions will be happening and approximately when, which can drive when you get some of the updates, after you hit a benchmark. Goals are in 3 areas. There should be a professional practice goal, a student learning goal, and a district improvement goal. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between a student learning and a district improvement. It'll look like several student learning goals. That's fine. Sometimes a district improvement goal might be, you're working on a building project, or you have budget challenges or something like that, that is part of the goals of the superintendent. So we talk about goals, and that, then the second part of the two-part tool is the standards. Think of this as a goal-centered evaluation. The goals are what move Ipswich forward. So you really want to concentrate first on the goals, and the standards take a little bit of a backseat. So the goals are unique to Ipswich. The standards are the same for every superintendent throughout the state. There are 4 standards: instructional leadership, management and operations, family and community engagement, and professional culture. The standards are often referred to as the rubric, and the rubric has a structure to it. There's the 4 standards. Each standard is broken down into indicators that give it a little more definition, I guess. And then each indicator has a descriptor. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And I want to put in a caveat, because I've run 2 committees lately that were doing this. The rubric has been updated. It only goes down to the indicator level. So if you have any around that go down to the element level, toss them out and get the new one off the website that only goes to the indicator level. You're nodding your head, so, okay. So this sort of give you an example of the structure of the standard, right? So standard 1 is instructional leadership. Part of instructional leadership is curriculum, having standard-based lessons that are implemented with integrity. So it gives you a descriptor of what the implementation of the curriculum looks like at an unsatisfactory up to an exemplary level. You'll always see bolded language in proficient. That's the language in regulation. Proficient is considered a high and very acceptable level of practice. Exemplary should be reserved for sort of being an example to other superintendents in the area or in the state. I think when this first came out, people looked at the word proficient and said, proficient, big deal. So that the DESE wanted people to understand that that is really intended to be very high, very acceptable, and good level of practice. So 5-step cycle, 2-part, 2 multi-part rating system. You'll give a rating on the goals that goes from did not meet up to exceeded, a rating on the standards that goes from unsatisfactory up to exemplary, and an overall rating that combines the 2 that goes from unsatisfactory up to exemplary. So those are the 3 components. Any questions so far? Going back to my funky guys. So how does it work? So at the beginning of the cycle, you're going to create the evaluation document. So you're working with the superintendent to draft the goals. You can use a subcommittee to begin that work. Sometimes on larger committees, that just makes sense. Sometimes it's easier for a smaller group of people to sort of parse out the wording and so forth. But however, whether you do that with the subcommittee or with the full committee, it's the school committee that has final approval on what the goals are. After you've created the goals, again, goals are unique to the district. So after you've decided on the goals, then pull out the rubric and identify the standards and indicators that you want to apply to the goals. So there's about 20 indicators. You do not need to, and we strongly recommend that you do not evaluate on every indicator. Pick some to focus on that most relate to your goals. Usually we say somewhere in the range of maybe 6 to 8. The trick is that all the standards should be evaluated, so that when you're picking that limited number of indicators, just make sure there's at least one from each standard. Does that make sense? So once you've done that, another thing I think that makes it easier as you go through is to have a discussion about what evidence you might like to see to show that the goals have been implemented. You guys aren't flies on the wall all day seeing the work that the superintendent does. So having that discussion about what the evidence is can help the superintendent think about, how am I going to demonstrate progress? How am I going to demonstrate proficiency? And it also has the advantage of helping everyone get the same idea of what that goal is intended to accomplish. There have been times when people look at a goal and they have like a different idea in their head of what the outcome is. So when you can have that good discussion about what's the outcome that we intend from this goal, then when you get to the end of the process and everyone's doing their individual evaluation, you'll find that when you get to compiling it, the ratings will be much tighter, much closer together if everyone all the way along had the same expectations. Does that make sense? So when you're thinking about, putting together that document of the goals, agree on the goals and think about the outcomes. When you think about SMART, right, the M can be the most complicated because it's easy to measure whether you completed a task. It's much harder to determine if you completed an outcome. But if you're going to move the district forward, it's the outcomes that you're looking for. I pick on superintendents with this one. Beware. When this model first came out, there was also a very efficient and effective move that a lot of superintendents were helping their administrators grow. And there were a number of superintendents whose the goal would be, I'll do X number of walkthroughs. Mm-hmm. So the superintendent got their 10,000 steps in, but what did the walkthrough accomplish? When the superintendent did a walkthrough with intention and told the committee, the intention of my doing walkthroughs is to work on classroom management, to work on making sure this happens in the schools, right? Then the superintendent is able to demonstrate we had growth because of the walkthroughs and the conversations I had with the principals. There was growth, not just that they met the task completion, right? And I often ask committees if we think about the outcome, one way to think about it is, how will things be different at the end of the cycle than they are now if progress is made? And that can be a way to sort of demonstrate that there was growth. Then, once you have the goals, again, goals first, then agree on the applicable indicators. Again, not too many. You'll have fewer headaches if you limit the number of indicators that you use. And then discuss the evidence. And you can use that, and I think, Kate, this was kind of the path you were going down a little bit in thinking. You can use that to kind of create a year-long agenda. So if we have the goals and we know what's going to happen and we want to see that progress throughout the year, what are the presentations that we might want to see throughout the year that will help us understand the growth that's occurring? And then when you get to the end again, it can help you keep your agendas a little more organized and purposeful, help you with that monitoring function that's important for the school committee. And then when you get to the end of the cycle, you're also thinking, I'm just reviewing information I've learned all the way along, not thinking about it for the first time. That makes sense to everybody? So I said that there were some things that were required and some that were optional. So SMART goals in the in the areas, the district improvement, student learning, and professional practice, a rating on all four of the standards, and the overall summative rating. Optional is you do not need to use all of the indicators. The timing of the evaluation cycle is up to the committee and the superintendent working together to agree on it, right? As this model has come into effect, a lot more committees have moved their evaluation cycle to match the goal-setting cycle for the district. So it's not off kilter with elections. If you have your elections in May, like you say, and then you have to get the evaluation done beforehand, you're almost taking a whole quarter of the school year away from the superintendent to be able to accomplish the goals. And then if you decide to follow that cycle, that you really want to do the evaluation at the end of the school year, right over the summer, right away in the fall or whenever, you can start to think about how do we handle the changes on the committee that might occur during that time. Who contributes to the composite evaluation? People going off up until the time they left, maybe people coming on from the time they came on to the end if they feel like they have enough information to do it. Someone might say, I've only been here 2 weeks, so I can't really contribute in this cycle. But however, it's the people sitting at the table when the final evaluation is up for a vote of approval that have the ability to vote. That makes sense? Weighting of the standards, I always say this now with some trepidation because I've never seen it happen. There are 4 standards. Presumably, they're equally weighted. If you feel there's some reason why one standard needs more attention, you can weight it differently, and that would come out in the overall rating on the standards. It's in the regulations, so I kind of feel like I have to say it. I've only ever seen one committee that did it, and I've been making this presentation since 2014, so not widely used. How the evaluation is used for contract renewal, for bonus, for raise, how that decision is up to the committee and the superintendent together. And then the process for completing the evaluation varies from place to place, and that's also local discretion. Questions so far?
What do you mean process for completing the evaluation varies?
So sometimes it goes to the chair to compile the composite. Sometimes it's a personnel subcommittee or a superintendent evaluation subcommittee. That's what I mean by the process to complete it. So it does need to be completed, and the process starts with the committee members, every committee member completing their own individual evaluation. You'll have information to do that, or I always think of, clear off the kitchen table and get ready to do some work. You'll have the superintendent's self-assessment summary of the year so far so that you're understanding what the work that was done is. With that evidence of progress and proficiency, that's kind of the same thing. And then you'll have the form to complete the evaluation. You may not remember this next time you get to it, but if you're using the state form, start on page 3, because the cover page is really the summary page. So you start in the middle and go to the end and then back. Then all those individual evaluations go to whoever the compiler is, whether it's the chair or the designee or a subcommittee. Another thing that I think is helpful in making sure it's a smooth process is to discuss how the composite will be created before someone goes off and does it, so that everyone has the same understanding. Every once in a while, we get a call from, we had our evaluation last night, and it actually became a discussion about how the composite got created rather than the evaluation of the superintendent. Because, a change in chair, a different chair might have a different approach than the previous chair. People might assume that the original approach was being used and don't quite understand how the composite was reached. So having that discussion about this is how the ratings will be handled, this is how the comments will be handled. When we put together the composite, can be useful conversations to have. And then that composite is discussed and voted on by the full committee at a public meeting. So, questions yet?
Talk a little bit more about the evidence of progress. Like, I'm looking at the example you had before, the curriculum one. So proficient was ensure, part of it, ensure that all instructional staff implemented effective and rigorous standard-based units of instruction. What's an example of how we would, of evidence of that we could evaluate?
I asked the superintendent to weigh in on that one.
I mean, you can use another example, I'm just putting
Yeah.
the one in front of me, but,
Yeah.
you know, how are we gonna see that one just because it's very specific to what's going on in the classroom too?
Right, right, and I think that's the discussion that we've been having is, what exactly is that? Does that, and, you know, is that providing curriculum documents? And then the question becomes, is that something that the superintendent did, or is that something that somebody else did at the direction of the superintendent? And is that meeting the goal or not?
Yeah,
Something that I have to physically do myself is the
no,
conversation that
no,
we've been
and I would say, I would say to that, no. The superintendent is not putting together the documents. The superintendent is making sure the documents are put together.
That would I would
Yeah.
expect, and so
Yeah.
to your point is sort of the, setting the direction, expecting it to happen to the principals, seeing it in the teachers, seeing it in the day-to-day execution. What's our evidence
So,
of that?
and if you think back to this being goal-centered,
Yeah,
that this may be something where it's more, if there is a goal related to updating curriculum, right? If there is a goal relating to evaluating, it may not be an indicator that you decide to use because it isn't relevant to the goals. But if it is relevant to the goals, then I think it's easier to start thinking about how will the superintendent show that the curriculum has been developed with standard-based instruction and so
Yeah.
forth. Does that make sense?
yeah, I mean, that's kind of my question, and maybe that's the part of we need to discuss that up front to say,
Yeah.
the goal is this, here's how we think you could demonstrate it, right? In fairness to us to evaluate, in fairness to you to be able to represent it.
Yeah, and I
Make sure we're clear on that ahead of time.
Yeah,
So
no,
we're not
understood.
in May
Right.
saying, I have no idea how to judge this.
yeah,
kind of,
and that's why I think it's, and that's why, first of all, that's why you, in part, you'll go a little nuts if you try to evaluate on every indicator. And that's why we say pick, and, you know, the document even says pick some focus indicators. Pick the indicators that relate to the goals, so that there should be, in the end, the superintendent should only have to present one body of evidence that fits both the goals and the standards, if the standards and the goals that you pick are well aligned together. And not, you know, here's my whole set of evidence for the goals, here's my whole set of evidence for the standards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally get that. Okay, thank you.
So the composite, whoever puts it together, I can tell you it's a challenge, because you have to kind of create this one document, but everybody should kind of be able to hear their voice in that document, which kind of gets to how you handle the narrative or how you handle the comments, right? When, in looking at the composite ratings, that it's very intentional that they're not rated, they're not numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can say, you know, call needs improvement 1, call exemplary 4, add them up, find an average, and that's where you plunk. That's part of the reason you have those descriptors, to try and get to being a place where it really, you can have the evidence, the comments and the evidence to back up how you got to a certain rating. So it shouldn't just be an average, and you have to land someplace, so it can't be just a tally, right? You have to land someplace. And then you might want to think about how the comments are handled. There are places that say, well, you know, the narrative of the composite isn't just a list of everybody's comments. It's sort of a compilation of everybody's comments, so that people feel reflected, but you don't, you know, it's, the evaluation in part provides guidance to the superintendent, right? Provides for, how the superintendent is doing and so forth. And if the comments are like all over the place and counter to each other, it's not helpful to the superintendent, which is why you want to make sure you have sort of one cohesive document that gives that direction. Does that make sense? It's not easy, believe me. So as you're putting together your individual evaluations, a couple things to keep in mind. I think that one of the values of this model for evaluation is that when it is done well, it is more objective and less subjective than a lot of evaluation models that were used in the past. When you're putting it together, you should be keeping in mind the evidence that the superintendent has, the evidence and the self-assessment that was provided, and your own observations. You're not, you've watched the superintendent work all year, you've worked with the superintendent all year, so you have your observations as well. So you're tying your ratings to that, you're going back to the goals, right? You agreed with the superintendent at the beginning of the process that the evaluation would be based on these particular goals. Things may come up, and you deal with them in the moment, or if you feel it's important, then maybe they are reflected in the goals in the next cycle. But in fairness to everybody, you evaluate on the goals and the standards that you agreed upon at the beginning of the cycle. So you have the evidence provided, you have your observations, and it's a particular time frame, right? It doesn't go back beyond the time frame that the evaluation covers. So you want to be able to tie your ratings and your comments to the evidence and the observations that, the evidence that was provided and the observations that you have. Does that make sense? So just a couple of reminders, the goals are specific to the individual superintendent and to the district. So you want to be able to consider the progress that was made on the action items that were in the goals and refer to the evidence that was provided as you're thinking about your rating and your comments. And then the standards, again, are the same for all superintendents throughout the state. And again, there should be a good matching or a good alignment between the goals and the standards that you're evaluating on. Couple of resources. On our website, we have a document evaluating the superintendent, which is basically this in narrative form. There's also, DESE has some resources on their website. They have a video series that talks about the different parts of the process, and it's a number of chairs and superintendents from around the state, different types of districts, that talk about how they've used the tool to be effective in growing the district, effective in that superintendent school committee relationship and building that, and how they've really used the process in a very positive way. So someone told me it was also good if you had insomnia, but I don't believe that, so. Questions?
You must have some.
Many?
Oh, you know what, we changed our, thank you.
Fire away.
So I think one of the ones that, I'll start at step one. So I don't know that we've used the superintendent's self-assessment well. Like, I don't know if that's a step that we do. So it seems like we sort of jump in at step two, and I think we talked about it this summer. So we're now at goal setting, but in order for us to do this appropriate evaluation, we should be given the self-assessment, which is sort of the baseline, like the starting point,
Well,
plus the goals? Or
well,
can we
I mean,
do
if it exists already, I wouldn't ask that it be created if it doesn't exist, but my observation, and I think the way this has tended to work best, because the superintendent is more immersed in the district goals and the district plan, is that the conversation generally starts with recommendations from the superintendent on these are the goals I think we should be looking at. And then, and he's getting there really from his own self-assessment and where he feels the need for growth in goal setting is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so, I mean, one of those evaluation tools that we should be getting is the self-assessment, the evidence, and the form. I mean, we can still do that without having the self-assessment, because we're relying on, well, these are the goals that we identified, so these are the improvement areas.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can sort, I mean, you could use the self-assessment, you could say that's kind of synonymous with the evidence, and just sort of a summary of, you know, here's the progress we made this year, this is where we are. It doesn't have to be overly, I mean, I always feel like you have to allow the superintendent to do the work, not continually report on doing the work, but allow them the time to actually do it. So you have to find the balance there.
And then the second one we had talked about over the summer was kind of identifying and having that discussion about, you know, an appropriate body of evidence. And, you know, so we see sort of the reports that the superintendent and his team have made. We see meeting agendas from meetings. We get reports about whether it was being X number of school visits and such. You know, but are there ways to incorporate evidence that are not directly reported from central office? So are there particular standards that relate to community engagement and other places that there's external indicators that we would be asking for input from other stakeholders?
No. So we kind of discourage I'm going to answer it in two parts. We kind of discourage the idea of a 360 review. But the other thing is that there is an element of the educator evaluation where feedback, like stakeholder feedback, should be part of the evidence. The feedback is gathered by the person being evaluated, not by the evaluator, and it's part of their evidence. So if there's feedback you're looking for from the community or from administrators or something, then at the beginning of the process, have that conversation about, you know, this is sort of important, this is kind of important that we feel we'd like to know about as part of the evidence. Part of that is, another part of that is your observations, right? So you may not be directly soliciting feedback about the evaluation but if you have, say, a goal on communication and you're hearing from constituents, hey, you know, that new newsletter that gets put out, that's fantastic. Then that becomes it's not directly from the superintendent, but it's your own observations that you're contributing to.
And then maybe we can even say this one later, but is there specific recommendations? I think last year, I don't think it's a secret, but there was a disagreement in the summative evaluation that we gave versus the superintendent's interpretation or belief of performance. How does the school committee sort of, I mean, other than build better goals, use the process better, are there specific guidance or places that we can avoid that this year? Is it just kind of what goes starting better at the front end?
I think a lot of it's starting better at the front end and remembering at the back end what you agreed to at the front end.
And limiting if you have goals with indicators, outcomes, that's what's being measured against, not something else that fit under that category that may have happened during the year that you felt you wanted to add to it. It really wasn't the goal.
Yeah, and that's where I say, you know, things come up, right? So you deal with them in the moment. And if there's something that seems to be important enough that you feel there's something more to do, then that becomes part of your goal setting and your expectations in the next cycle. The one thing that I don't think I said clearly enough is when you're looking at goals, not too many, like 3 or, you know, 5, probably 3 to 5 is the typical. Because if you have too many, you don't have any, right? The work is too spread out. So I'm not sure that I stuck that point in. I don't know if that's helpful at all or not, but.
You mentioned a year-long calendar. And I think we're going to try to do better this year with operations and having a mid-cycle review. But do you have examples of other districts that have, whether it's monthly or just a more specific?
Not really. I think the examples that Kate may have from the workshop are probably about, because I take that back. So I have a couple examples of a year-long agenda, but it's not as much related to superintendent goals as sort of the operations of the school committee and making sure that you're hitting the presentations that you want. So when I'm talking about the year-long agenda in this respect, it's sort of being able to look at the goals and think about how does that goal play out during the year? So when would it be appropriate for the superintendent to give an update on particular goals? So that you're sort of building the knowledge. And the other, I thought was where you were going with one of your questions, and then you went in a different direction. Sometimes superintendents will have Google Drive folders, and as evidence for the goals is completed, they'll drop them into the folder so that you're sort of, again, building that evidence throughout the year, and you have it all in one place at the end of the year. Does that make sense?
I have a couple of questions. So I don't know if it was step 3 or step 4, but the mid-year review, which is really just sort of a presentation and then a discussion.
Yep.
Is there an opportunity to revise goals at that point?
Yep.
You can revise goals mid-year if, a pandemic happens or something happens, or just something, I don't think we would aim to, but stuff
Yeah,
does.
well, sometimes, pandemics happen. And that, we had a lot of discussions with school committees about, within, overnight, the entire goal of the district became our students safe, right? Right? Our
Right,
students
that's
fed
okay,
and our
yeah.
students safe. But you didn't want to forget about the other goals, so because that was March, I won't even go into that because we're not going to have a pandemic again, and you're not going to have to worry about it. But you didn't, if you didn't want to lose sight of the goal, right? You wanted to, but sometimes goals do need to be revised. Like the example I gave, if you had a goal with the expectation, maybe to implement a program, and the expectation was this grant is coming, it's going to help us implement this program, and the grant, for some reason, doesn't come, it's going to at least slow down the implementation of that program. So it would be unfair to say at the end of the year, well, you didn't implement it. The reason was the resources weren't there to do it. It was not the fault of the superintendent that it didn't happen.
And my second question is, I think, or just an observation for our committee, I think we could do better agreeing on the evidence requested beforehand as a group. And then I think just being more intentional about talking about goals throughout the year and lining up presentations and maybe attaching it to agenda items. I don't want to promise to do all those things. We'll just see what's best for us. But so we're not, setting it in September and then talking about it in May. And I think the onus is on all of us to be gathering our own information as we go about the goals. He's gathering evidence, but I think we should all be gathering our own evidence and thoughts too as we go. And then one more thing. Potentially, in your superintendent reports, you could potentially be buying some of your, I did this, because it meets goal 3, and, just to remind us that, because sometimes I think we've given you feedback that your superintendent's reports are a bit of a laundry list of everything you've done.
Yep.
And I know, many of them are tied to goals, but just to be more intentional about stating that for us.
One thing I've heard, I think, Brian, I think you said it, maybe both years when we did on your goals or evaluation is, you could sit at your desk, focus on just these goals and not do anything else to run the district. How are we supposed to evaluate, overall performance? Is that page 3 as opposed to each of the standards and the standards and the indicators? Because like page 3 is the summary.
No, actually, no, I mean, this really is a goal-centered evaluation that, and some of this is, I think there has to be an assumption that when there are issues to be addressed, the superintendent is going to be, for the growth of the district, that the superintendent will be addressing those in the goals, but that the superintendent is competent to do the day-to-day operations of the district. And if that day-to-day operations isn't happening, then those are maybe goals that you set for the superintendent to address those issues. So you want the goal, you're right, I mean, you want the goals to get addressed, but you also have to realize that there is a lot of other work that goes on.
If our goals aren't good and robust, if it's just, like I think we talked about at operations, if you just go to 3 school council meetings every quarter, but does that mean you're participating and making things better? And so if we tie them more to the outcomes instead of just checking the boxes of going to council meetings, you could do that well, or you could do that just you show up and sit in the back and I think we could do better about tying it to the outcomes more, which
I think I'm struggling, or we're struggling, because at the same conversation, I think it was at the operations meeting, but also a little bit here at our last meeting, when we were talking about, for example, visits to, call them walkthroughs, but maybe monthly measurable visits to the different buildings with the different administrators. And to your point, Dorothy, like, superintendent can get their 10,000 steps, but what does that mean? And how do you make it measurable?
I think,
Not
well,
the
and I think that's
step.
that's why you have the discussion, like, what can the superintendent, that's why you have the discussion of the evidence, that how can the superintendent talk to you about the changes that took place or whatever that will help you understand that progress was made. It's not, I mean, SMART goals are not easy, I think you.
Right. But I think to continue down that line, though, it's not, I don't know that it's necessarily spending a day or a half a day in a building and then writing a summary of what I did to put in as evidence, because then I'm taking away time
Yep.
to write a summary that's
Yep.
going to be stuck in a folder as evidence.
Right,
That
right,
doesn't-
right.
That still doesn't prove anything.
Yeah, well, and I think that as this model has grown, right, that educators are far more careful is not quite, getting to the end of the day here. They're far more discriminating about what they put in as evidence and not just throwing in a lot of documents, right?
Right.
That they're much more thoughtful about what really is going to show the evidence here. So it's not, I guess maybe quality over quantity for the evidence is a way to think about it. That, doing the walkthrough and then the conversations that take place after the walkthrough may not have evidence of growth immediately. It may be down the road when the conversations play out further and some change gets implemented because of it.
And that's the difficult to measure part.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
I think one of the things when I looked at, this was to your early point this evening, asking for goals, to see samples of other districts' goals, because mine have been similar for years, and, you know, the evidence has varied year to year. But seeing how other superintendents write their goals is very different than what we've been doing here.
And I
I've
think-
gathered some samples of that I'll share with the
Yeah,
school.
and I think that to the point of the goals are similar, the goals generally are iterations, right? It's growth. It's not like I have a goal about, I can't even make something up, but generally the goals are sort of the next step of growth, right? They're not vastly different from year to year. So the fact that the goals are similar might be because the work continues. Change takes time. Progress takes time. So they're not, they may be the next step in a larger plan. That's the goal for the year.
But for a walkthrough, an example could be, you know, there's a, you know, I have a concern about X, Y, and Z. And here are the reasons that I am concerned about this. And then the next time, you know, and I spoke to so-and-so, who would be, you know, responsible for this. And the next time, do a walkthrough, and hopefully there's something that's changed. You know, this was implemented, and it seems to be working better for the students, or that's sort of it.
In a very broad sense, in a very broad sense, I think you've sort of got it. In there's certain senses in that write-up that the so-and-so that got spoken to might be too much detail, so, in a personnel sense, right? But, you know, the objective
the
of,
issue, right.
the objective of the walkthrough was to, I'll go back to one of the things, to ensure that teachers knew how to use the new technology. As a result of the walkthroughs, we have implemented these different plans to help the teachers.
Right.
I mean, in a very, so, and then in subsequent walkthroughs, we could see that the technology was, you know, here's a couple examples of the way the technology is being used effectively for students.
Right.
So, big picture,
Right.
right?
Right.
As
Focus on
opposed
the
to-
issue, not the
Yeah.
person
Right.
implementing it.
Right,
but that's what I
big
mean.
picture.
Yeah.
But the ability to show there was a starting point, there's a better ending point, I guess is the easy way to say it.
I would like to just be respectful of your time and try to wrap it up if we can, unless there's any burning questions. But I do want to stress that I think, have another operations meeting where we can
We're rewriting goals.
flesh this out a little bit and get into more detail and work on finalizing goals, or work towards finalizing goals. And I also want to stress that Dorothy is a resource for us, right? I mean, not like
Our
every
dues are
day,
paid,
all
yes.
day long, but
I
we
did-
do
I
have-
just-
Kate.
There's a little bit of a caveat.
Yes.
Dorothy is a resource who's retiring at the end of the year.
Wow.
So
Okay.
there will be a new resource.
MASC is a resource.
MASC is a
for us,
resource.
and we will always have a field rep that we can
Yes, and
utilize
the
for,
incoming field rep she's great, so.
for questions and so. Thank you very much. I found this really helpful, and
Welcome.
we got a lot of questions answered, a lot of things learned. So, thank you, and thank you for these documents. I think I have a couple follow-up action items that I'll pull together and put on the agenda minutes. And shoot me any too if you have any action items from tonight that I can get in the minutes. That'd be great. Okay. Else? All right. Motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
By Jeff, second by Diana. All in favor? All right, 6-0, adjourn at 9:36. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very
Right,
welcome.
Ipswich, mics are
Right.
still live for the moment.